Chapter 1079. The moment the 7 blood-red arrows shot over, Chu Xiu's sense of crisis immediately rose to the extreme. Even the expressions of Luo Mo and the others changed as they looked at each other. The power contained in the 7 blood-red arrows was simply astonishing. It was an extremely evil power that they could not see through. However, they could feel the danger within it. Everyone present had a grudge against Chu Xiu. It could be said that everyone wanted Chu Xiu dead. Could it be that someone had secretly done this? However, everyone present was also at a loss. This level of power was not something they could control. If they could control this level of power, would Chu Xiu still be alive now? The 7 blood-red arrows pierced through the void, seemingly ignoring any power. Chu Xiu gathered all the power in his body and released the small amount of power that belonged to Dugu Weiwei's indestructible heavenly demon book and attacked the 7 blood-red arrows. The first blood-red arrow shattered immediately. The second blood-red arrow exploded into a bloody mist. However, the power that Chu Xiu could control was not much. The third blood-red arrow had already used up the last bit of its power. The remaining arrows continued to attack Chu Xiu. Dugu Weiwei's power had been exhausted. The boundless world-extinguishing fire bloomed. However, the remaining 4 blood-red arrows directly passed through the world-extinguishing fire, causing this move to miss. The misty slash and the breaking formula's sword intent slashed out consecutively. However, the 4 blood-red arrows seemed to be in a different space from Chu Xiu. The 2 slashes missed and slashed at the void. Seeing the 4 blood-red arrows getting closer and closer, Chu Xiu let out a low grunt. Boundless bloody mist filled the air around his body. His powerful aura even attracted the power of heaven and earth, causing the entire space to start trembling. Once the blood demon change technique was used, Chu Xiu's side really started to go all out. Guo Xiaofeng glanced at the surrounding space worriedly. However, he did not dare to stop Chu Xiu, who was fighting desperately at this time. A powerful aura descended, but Chu Xiu merely formed a Buddhist seal with his hand. In an instant, a blood-colored Buddha Dharma idol condensed behind him. The blood-colored sun descended from the sky in the dark space. As the blood-colored Buddha formed a Buddhist seal and smashed it forward, even existences at Rama's level would have to treat it with caution. However, it was still useless. Luo Mo and the others who were present also wore solemn expressions. They finally understood that the strength of the person who attacked was simply beyond their imagination. In fact, this power had already surpassed the scope of their understanding. Chu Xiu had attacked several times in a row, and all of them had been killing moves with all his might. If it were them, they wouldn't have been able to resist so easily. However, when faced with these blood-red arrows, only Dugu Weiwei's power had been effective at the beginning, and he had destroyed 3 of them. As for the other 4, even though Chu Xiu had started to go all out, he still could not destroy them. At this moment, in Chu Xiu's mind, the inner demon kept shouting, "It's the 3 spiritual souls and 7 physical forms. It's the 7 physical forms. These 7 arrows have locked onto your 7 physical forms. If you don't stop them, your 4 physical forms will be destroyed and you will definitely die." The inner demon resided in Chu Xiu's mind. Even if Chu Xiu died, he would not die. However, the problem was that these 4 blood-red arrows were heading straight for Chu Xiu's 4 physical forms. When the time came, he could not guarantee that these 4 blood-red arrows would avoid him. What's the point of knowing that these things have locked onto the 7 physical forms? The crux of the matter is, how can I stop these damn things? By now, Chu Xiu had used all his trump cards. He had even used a life-risking secret technique like the great skill of blood demon transformation, but the result was completely useless. This power had completely exceeded his imagination. He could not stop it, he could not stop it. Chu Xiu was not someone who would give up easily, but at this moment, he could not help but feel a sense of despair. Only those who had died once would know how precious life was. Although Chu Xiu's actions were crazy, he did not want to die, and he could not die. In an instant, a layer of flames burned around Chu Xiu's body. It was not the true fire of internal strength, but the primordial spirit fire. What was even more extreme than the burning of qi and blood was the burning of the primordial spirit. Under the burning of the power of the primordial spirit, Chu Xiu began to use the heaven sun gazing at air skill to deduce the power of the blood-red arrows. No matter what kind of strange secret technique this was, there was no such thing as a perfect martial art in this world. No matter how perfect it was, there would definitely be a loophole. This was the first time that Chu Xiu had pushed the heaven sun gazing at air skill to the peak, at the cost of burning his primordial spirit. Seeing Chu Xiu in this state, Mei Qinglian and Lu Jianghe both shouted, but they were powerless. In the Jianghu, those at the true fire spirit cultivation realm were already considered strong, but here, they were just spectators. In the face of this level of power, they did not even have the qualifications to be spectators. They could only accept their fate. But they accepted their fate. Even if Chu Xiu was really in a hopeless situation, he did not want to accept his fate. In an instant, the primordial spirit fire burned to the extreme. He finally saw it. Behind the 4 remaining blood-red arrows, there were 4 faint, dark red lines that connected to a place far, far away, all the way to the west. In the deep and serene hall, the 4 blood-red arrows floated in the air. Opposite them was a crudely made scarecrow with twisted black magic patterns drawn on it. But it was unknown when those black demonic patterns, in the dark, were pulling countless black threads, connecting the straw doll to Chu Xiu. And there was only one person standing in front of the straw doll, with red hair and a black robe. The coldness in his eyes seemed to be able to freeze everything. Jun Wuxian. It was Jun Wuxian. There had never been an opponent that could make Chu Xiu so afraid. Jun Wuxian, whose strength was beyond imagination, was one of them. Last time, Chu Xiu had thought that he had used Zhong Xinxiu's hand to force the other party to retreat, and also successfully made the other party misunderstand his relationship with Zhong Xinxiu, so he did not dare to touch him. But Chu Xiu had still somewhat underestimated Jun Wuxian. In today's world, the only person that Jun Wuxian did not dare to touch was Zhong Xinxiu. Zhong Xinxiu could protect Chu Xiu for a while, but she could not protect him forever. As long as Jun Wuxian was given a chance, he would not give up on killing Chu Xiu. But the problem was, even if Chu Xiu had pushed the heaven sun gazing at air skill to the extreme, seeing this, he was even more desperate. It was actually very easy to break the secret skill that Jun Wuxian had displayed. As long as he could take away the straw doll in front of him or block it, it would be enough to cut off the relationship between Chu Xiu and the straw doll. But the problem was, Jun Wuxian could kill him from thousands of miles away. How could he take away the straw doll from thousands of miles away? At this moment, Chu Xiu suddenly found that there seemed to be something wrong with his body. Under the peak state of the heaven sun gazing at air skill, not a single detail in Chu Xiu's body could be concealed. In his heart meridian, he did not know when there was a trace of devil qi. It was very faint, so faint that if Chu Xiu had not examined it with the peak state of the heaven sun gazing at air skill, he would not have noticed it. He seemed to vaguely remember that this trace of devil qi was the trace of devil qi that appeared in the rootless sacred flame when he was refining and breaking the array. Chu Xiu did not know what the use of this trace of devil qi was. But at this time, he had no other way. He could only use the last trace of his strength to draw out this trace of devil qi. In an instant, Chu Xiu's entire body was enveloped by an extremely dense demonic aura. In his storage box, a statue that looked like a Buddha but not a Buddha appeared in front of Chu Xiu. In the extremely deep devil qi, the statue began to melt. This statue was found by Chu Xiu from the inheritance of the heartless demon lord. Lu Jianghe had said that what was recorded on it should be a remarkable power, but the kind that could not be learned. Later on, Chu Xiu had studied it and even looked for Shang Tianliang to study it together. But in the end, he did not gain anything and did not understand it. However, as the demonic aura melted the outer shell of the statue, the demonic patterns on it squirmed like they were alive. Chu Xiu still couldn't understand what they meant, but he didn't know why those demonic patterns were deeply imprinted in his mind. At this time, the 4 blood-red arrows had arrived in front of him. At this moment, Chu Xiu's body suddenly began to expand. It was not the Dharma idol, but his own body. Wrapped in the boundless devil qi, his body began to expand. In an instant, he was thousands of feet tall, like an ancient demon god standing on the ground. With a punch that seemed to be able to tear the sky and split the earth, shattered a blood-red arrow. In an instant, the two forces began to explode, and the entire space seemed to be shaking. But then, everyone took a look and realized that it was not as if the space was really shaking, as if it was going to collapse at the next moment. Everyone's expression changed, and they had no choice but to retreat. Mei Qingnian still wanted to stay, but she was forcibly dragged out by Lu Jianghe. Girl from the Shadow Demon sect, calm down. You don't even have the qualifications to watch a battle of this level. Don't worry, good people don't live long, while scourges live for thousands of years. Chu Xiu, that kid, is too evil. He won't die so easily. Mei Qingnian looked worriedly at the terrifying power fluctuations coming from the space. The power was so strong that it made her feel as small as an ant. She did not like this feeling of powerlessness. It was just like when the Shadow Demon sect was destroyed in the past, she was also powerless. At this time, Guo Xiaofeng directly fell to the ground and sighed. Destroyed, all destroyed. When Chu Xiu and the others fought earlier, even though there was a great commotion, it was unable to affect this space. But now, this power had caused the space to fluctuate. Maybe in a while, the two worlds would be completely connected. He had been guarding here for decades, but he did not expect to fail at the last moment. This was Guo Xiaofeng's character. He would not blame others, but he would blame his own negligence, which led to the current situation. Su Ci, Luo Mo, and the others looked at each other with serious expressions. Regardless of whether it was the strange power of the blood-red arrow or the power that Chu Xiu had unleashed at the end, they were existences that exceeded their imaginations. Previously, they thought that they were already at the peak of the Jianghu, and that they could touch the sky with a raise of their hand. But now, it seemed that the sky was still very far away from them. Chapter 1080. The power of a divine power was completely different from a martial technique. Only a divine power could block a divine power. Of course, although Dugu Weiwei's power was not a divine power, it was obviously even more terrifying than a divine power. Therefore, Dugu Weiwei's power could destroy a divine power. The demonic pattern on the statue was a divine power. A hidden divine power was purified by the powerful demonic qi around Chu Xiu and branded in his mind. This divine power was called the law embodiment of heaven and earth. With the body of a human, he weighed the power of heaven and earth. Under the law embodiment of heaven and earth, Chu Xiu's body had completely evolved into the powerful demon gods that were nurtured by heaven and earth during the ancient times. The blood-red arrows were aimed at Chu Xiu's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls. This divine power could be said to be extremely evil and strange. It could be said that there was almost no way to block it. However, Chu Xiu was now using a divine power against a divine power. Although it was difficult, he still had the power to fight. The last 3 blood-red arrows were shattered by Chu Xiu's 3 consecutive punches. However, with every punch, Chu Xiu's figure would shrink by a size, and his power would also start to wildly scatter in all directions. When the last punch was thrown, Chu Xiu's law embodiment of heaven and earth could no longer be maintained and was completely shattered. Standing on the spot, Chu Xiu's face was extremely pale. It could be said that there was not a single trace of blood on his face. He was simply like a dead man. This could be said to be the most serious injury Chu Xiu had suffered so far. He had burned his essence blood and primordial spirit. This had even hurt his foundation and was no longer something that could be recovered in a short period of time. Just as Chu Xiu was struggling to leave, his expression suddenly changed. The silhouettes of Dugu Weiwa and Ning Xuanji's battle that were frozen in the void before were changing and moving. It was as if they were reenacting the scene of their final battle. However, the surrounding space was becoming more and more unstable, and the fluctuations were increasing. This space was already on the verge of exploding. Chu Xiu didn't even dare to imagine how powerful that power would be under the strangulation of the laws of heaven and earth. He wanted to use the last of his strength to escape from this space, but at this time, his body was almost empty, and he couldn't even use his true chi to fly. At this moment, everything around them began to distort. Ning Xuanji and Dugu Weiwei's imprint shadows, as well as the image of the other world, began to distort in an instant. Chu Xiu's figure was directly sucked into it. Chu Xiu clenched his teeth and resisted the force with all his might. He had used all his strength, risked his life and used his luck to resist Jun Wushan's sneak attack. He did not believe that he would die here. The next moment, a ray of light suddenly emerged from Chu Xiu's body. A stone with strange patterns appeared around Chu Xiu, and a layer of golden halo enveloped Chu Xiu. This stone turned out to be the sky-connecting key. Since this thing was smashed with Chu Xiu's physical body in the 6 illusory realms, it had been staying in Chu Xiu's primordial spirit and even helped him cross the space barrier of Ludu. Unexpectedly, at this time, the sky-connecting key played a role again. The layer of golden light enveloped Chu Xiu. No matter how the surrounding space was distorted, it couldn't hurt Chu Xiu at all. But at the same time, he also lost the ability to move freely. He could only let himself be swept back and forth in the distorted space, not knowing where he was swept to. At this time, Chu Xiu did not notice that the marks left by Dugu Weiwei were also distorted. Among them, one of the marks was staring at Chu Xiu's eyes. Although the face was blurred, it seemed to have intelligence. The next moment, the mark actually left the distorted space on its own initiative. Following the black line of the 7 nails head arrows on Chu Xiu's body, it floated towards the west. Inside the gate of heaven, Jun Wushan frowned. In front of him, the 7 blood arrows had not come close to the grass doll before they had exploded into a cloud of blood mist. The 7 nails head arrows had been blocked. The power of the magical power was unstoppable, especially when it was the magical power that Jun Wushan had personally displayed. But now, the 7 nails head arrows had failed. Who was it? Zhong Shenxiu again? What kind of cause and effect did this Chu Xiu have on him that Zhong Shenxiu could protect him time and time again? At this moment, the grass doll exuded a demonic aura. The demonic chi coalesced into a blurry shadow dressed in black. Although it was just a shadow, the power it exuded was so strong that it made people tremble. Even Jun Wushan was suppressed by it to the point that he could not even lift his head. Behind Jun Wushan, the 6 paths of reincarnation appeared. His body affected the heaven and earth, and the wheel spun rapidly. His fiery red hair fluttered in the wind, and his aura had risen to the extreme. He was Jun Wushan, the gate master of the gate of heaven. In this world, in this pugilistic world, even Zhong Shenxiu, who was stronger than him, could not make him bow his head. But at this moment, the shadow slapped out, passing through space and time. It was unstoppable and unavoidable. The 6 paths of reincarnation were behind Jun Wushan shattered. He was slapped so hard that he spat out blood and crashed into the stone pillar behind him. After the slap, the illusory figure turned into a thin layer of demonic aura and disappeared. Zhu Tianxiao was also in the main hall. He looked at all of this, dumbfounded. In the gate of heaven, the gate master, Jun Wushan, was simply a godlike existence. But now, this god in his eyes was slapped by a shadow, and he was sent flying while vomiting blood. This was simply destroying his worldview. And at this moment, the grass doll that represented Chu Xiu suddenly exploded, turning into a pile of debris. This caused Zhu Tianxiao to be stunned. He knew about the 7 nails head arrows, and it could be said to be incomparably evil. But no martial skill or magic was perfect, and the 7 nails head arrows were naturally the same. Although the grass doll of the 7 nails head arrows could be connected to the target, to really cause damage to the target, only the 7 blood arrows could be used. So, as long as the 7 blood arrows didn't completely kill the target, it meant that the 7 nails head arrows had lost its effectiveness. Just now, he had seen the 7 blood arrows explode into a cloud of blood mist. Why did the grass doll that represented Chu Xiu explode now? The explosion of the grass doll meant that the target had completely perished and was no longer in this world. But without the blood arrows, how did the target die? Zhu Tianxiao didn't have time to think about this carefully. Jun Wuxian was vomiting blood continuously, and it seemed to be very serious. He quickly went up to him and said, "Gate Master, scram!" An angry roar was heard, and Zhu Tianxiao's short and fat body flew out of the hall. Jun Wuxian struggled to get up, his eyes filled with horror. Who was that figure? There was only a hazy shadow, and Jun Wuxian couldn't be sure. But the aura of that figure was very similar to a person he had never seen before, but an existence that all the Gate of Heaven warriors feared. Jun Wuxian didn't dare to think, and he didn't dare to guess. If it was really him, he really couldn't do anything to the Kunlun devil cult. At this time, outside Li City, everyone had already seen the powerful distorted waves that came from the space. When the force became stronger and stronger, and even reached the extreme, Guo Xiaofeng had already thought that the passage between the two worlds would be completely opened. In the end, who would have thought that when the force became distorted to the extreme, it collapsed at the same time, and the space began to close up, as if it had never appeared in the first place. Guo Xiaofeng was instantly dumbfounded. What was this? Destruction and construction? The powerful force not only completely destroyed the passage here, but also the passage to the world on the other side. A piece of space disappeared, and at the same time, the place where the two worlds connected disappeared. Impossible, impossible. Mei Qinglian's face was pale as she muttered to herself. She couldn't believe that Chu Xiu had died there just like that. Lu Jianghu also had a look of disbelief on his face. It doesn't make sense, that kid Chu Xiu definitely couldn't have died just like that. Compared to the others, Lu Jianghu actually knew more about Chu Xiu. He had stayed in Chu Xiu's mind for such a long time, and he knew quite a lot of Chu Xiu's secrets. Just based on the fact that Chu Xiu had some kind of connection with Patriarch Dugu, he didn't believe that Chu Xiu would die so easily. But the entire space had already been destroyed, and even he was shocked by that power. It was simply not something that a human could contend against. He wanted to convince himself that in the face of such power, Chu Xiu was still alive. Perhaps even Lu Jianghu didn't believe it himself. Seeing this scene, Han Jusi of the real martial arts sect sneered and said, "Chu Xiu has done many evil things and killed countless people." At this time, he didn't die in the hands of other warriors, but he died under the power of heaven and earth. This can be considered as the evil will be punished by God. It can be seen that even God cannot tolerate him. Blood light flashed around Lu Jianghu's body, and his aura was raised to the extreme. The cold aura immediately shocked Han Jusi. Seeing this, Luomo and the others took a step forward. Not to mention that Chu Xiu was now dead. Even if he was not dead, with so many righteous experts here, they wouldn't have the chance to act violently. Lu Jianghu gritted his teeth, and directly left with Mei Qinglian and the others. Several mysterious connecting heaven and earth supreme experts were here. At this time, it was not rational to fight with them. Han Jusi said in a low voice, "Are we not going to keep them here?" Shadow Demon Sect's Mei Qinglian, Blood Demon Hall's Hall Master Lu Jianghu, they are the top combat power of the Kunlun devil cult, and their strength is not weak. Lu Changlu shook his head and said, "We can't keep them here for the time being. Don't forget about Zhongxinxiu. We don't know whether Zhongxinxiu is only protecting Chu Xiu, or protecting the Kunlun devil cult." Hearing Lu Changlu say this, Han Jusi didn't say anything more. He had also seen Zhongxinxiu's strength. Even 800 years ago, there was no such terrifying existence in Jianghu. It had to be said that Chu Xiu's performance last time had indeed frightened many people. Zhongxinxiu's tiger skin banner was very useful, so useful that even experts like Luomo did not dare to act rashly at this time. However, Su Ci, Luomo, and the others also sighed. Perhaps even they did not believe that Chu Xiu would die so easily. After all, Chu Xiu had the undying demon pill in his body, and he had a record of resurrection. However, the undying demon pill was not truly undying. This time, the situation was completely different from the last time. Under this kind of powerful force that could destroy the passage between the two worlds, not to mention the physical body, even the true spirit would be smashed to pieces. Chapter 1081. When the news of Chu Xiu's death spread throughout the pugilistic world, everyone's first reaction was disbelief. Chu Xiu, who rebuilt the Kunlun Devil cult and called himself the Devil Lord, who caused the entire pugilistic world to be powerless against him, died just like that? Moreover, the reason for Chu Xiu's death was still unclear. The details of what happened in the space in Liqing were not revealed because the matter was a little complicated and involved too many ancient secrets. It was not a big deal for experts like Luo Mo and Su Ci to know about these things. However, if other warriors knew about it, it would actually bring more trouble. Of course, this was only one of the reasons. The deeper reason was that even they did not know how Chu Xiu died. Although Chu Xiu was drowned in the collapsing space in the end, if not for the strange 7 blood arrows, Chu Xiu would definitely be fine. Perhaps he would have already brought the things on Dugu way back to the Kunlun Devil cult to count the spoils. So the key question now was, who shot the 7 blood arrows? Chu Xiu had too many enemies in the pugilistic world. There were simply too many people who wanted to kill him. However, the power of the 7 blood arrows was so strong and so strange. In the pugilistic world, it would be easy to find someone who had such power and also had a grudge against Chu Xiu. The Lord of Tianmen, Jun Wuxian, was the most suspicious person. Of course, this was not important. No one would go to Jun Wuxian to verify this matter. The dead Chu Xiu naturally had to live a better life than the living Chu Xiu. The death of such a great demon was a good thing for the entire pugilistic world. So when the news of Chu Xiu's death was known, almost the entire pugilistic world was cheering. However, there were some other things that were hidden. For example, the Beggars sect was also cheering. Their sect leader, who had been missing for decades, had finally returned. They would no longer be treated as stinky beggars. Currently, at the peak of Kunlun Mountain, inside the newly built Kunlun Devil cult, almost all of the higher-ups belonging to the Kunlun Devil cult were in disbelief. The Kunlun Devil cult had just been established, and it had just forced the alliance of the righteous sects to retreat. It was currently at its peak, and in the future, it might be able to recreate the power of the Kunlun Devil cult. But now, Chu Xiu was dead. The leader of their Kunlun Devil cult was dead. What kind of joke was this? As soon as this news came out, the Kunlun Devil cult's internal structure was already somewhat unstable. The newly joined disciples were still fine. They didn't have the strength, and the Kunlun Devil cult wasn't a place they could come and go as they pleased. The real troublesome ones were Qin Chaoxian, Yumoya, and the other former members of the Yinma clan. They had originally joined Chu Xiu under half coercion. Now that Chu Xiu was dead, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't have other thoughts. Qin Chaoxian coughed and said, "Everyone, now that official Chu has passed away, should we..." Before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by Lu Jianghu. "Who said Chu Xiu is dead?" Qin Chaoxian was stunned and said, "That's what the pugilistic world says." "And didn't you see the scene at that time?" Lu Jianghu snorted and said, "We didn't see Chu Xiu die. We just didn't see Chu Xiu come out of that space." Qin Chaoxian smiled bitterly and said, "Isn't that the same thing?" "Of course it's not the same thing." Lu Jianghu said coldly, "Chu Xiu has the immortal demon core in his body. As long as the demon core is not destroyed, the true spirit will not die. There will always be a trace of life left." Yumoya said, "But the immortal demon core is not truly immortal. It's enough to destroy 2 world passages. If it collapses, the true spirit will not be able to survive. Even if Zhongshanxiu and Jun Wuxian come, they probably won't be able to withstand it. They can't withstand it, but that doesn't mean that the boy Chu Xiu can't." Lu Jianghu glanced at the people around him. Strands of evil blood qi spread out from his body, and a dignified pressure spread out. He said coldly, "What hasn't our holy sect seen? That boy Chu Xiu has also died more than once or twice. In any case, I don't believe that he's really dead. Hold on for me. At this time, if anyone dares to betray me, don't blame me for not showing mercy. Do you know how my holy sect dealt with traitors in the past? They crippled their martial arts and meridians and hung them on the flagpole in front of the dragon gate like dried chickens. When they're dried, they'll be thrown out to feed the wild dogs. Lu Jianghe's usual unruly manner was gone. The smell of blood in his words was so thick that it was frightening. No one doubted that he was lying. Only then did everyone recall that although this person wasn't very reliable in the past, he was still the strongest among all the hall masters of the Kunlun demon sect 500 years ago. There were only a handful of cultivators of the same level who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. In fact, he had even crossed paths with a legendary existence like Ning Xuanji. In the past, the Blood Demon Hall had followed the Kunlun devil cult to conquer the world. His blood demon divine art had been refined using the blood of a group of powerhouses from 500 years ago. When Mei Qinglian and Chu Wuji saw that Lu Jianghe had subdued everyone, they couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief at the same time. Although they had previously felt that Lu Jianghe was a little unreliable, it now seemed that the one who had the ability to subdue the situation was still Lu Jianghe. Mei Qinglian was a woman after all. When Chu Xiu was still around, everyone knew that she was Chu Xiu's trusted aide, so they gave her face. Chu Wuji's strength and experience were still shallow after all. It might make sense if Old Wei came, but Chu Wuji didn't have the qualifications to subdue the situation at all. Others like Lu Fengxian, Luo Feiheng, and Chu Xiu's good friends, although they would never betray him, they didn't have the slightest foundation in the Kunlun devil cult, so their words didn't matter at all. Following Lu Jianghe's words, Shang Tianliang also said in a deep voice, "If Merchant City is merged into the Kunlun devil cult, everyone will suffer together, and everyone will prosper together." Not to mention that no one saw Chu Xiu die with their own eyes. Even if that kid Chu Xiu really died, why, do you still want to disband? With Shang Tianliang, a powerhouse at the heaven and earth elemental enlightenment realm, confirming his attitude, everyone present immediately fell silent. In terms of strength, no one could compare to Shang Tianliang. After Chu Xiu died, everyone originally thought that Shang Tianliang would stand on his own, but Shang Tianliang wouldn't do such a short-sighted thing. He had already brought out all the people from Merchant City. Not to mention that Chu Xiu wasn't here. Even if Chu Xiu was here, he would still be a threat to him. However, for such a long time, Shang Tianliang had followed Chu Xiu on expeditions everywhere, fighting this and that. His interests had long been closely aligned with Chu Xiu and the Kunlun devil cult. In the eyes of other Jianghu people, he was on Chu Xiu's side. At this time, even if Shang Tianliang wanted to leave Kunlun and stand on his own, although he didn't have to worry about anything, the whole of Merchant City would definitely be suppressed. Merchant City's current status was similar to that of the Kunlun devil cult subsidiary sects 500 years ago. Even if one's name wasn't Kunlun devil cult, others would still think that one was a member of the Kunlun devil cult and would definitely not tolerate it. At this moment, Lu Jianghe suddenly saw Master Yuan Ji, who was poking his head out from the crowd. He directly went over to Master Yuan Ji and pulled him out. With a fierce expression, he said, "Didn't you get the inheritance of the heaven-weeping demon lord?" "Just in time. Tell me how Chu Xiu is faring now." Master Yuan Ji said with a long face, "Since such a big thing happened, I definitely have to do some divination first, but there's no result at all. Official Chu has karmic reincarnation on him. Using ordinary divination methods, there's no way I can tell anything. Only by using items that are extremely close to him can I find some clues." Lu Jianghe scratched his head and said, "How close to him?" Master Yuan Ji said, "Very close to him. It even needs to have a certain karmic connection with official Chu." Hearing what Master Yuan Ji said, Lu Jianghe scratched his head even more. Where could he find such an item? He did have Chu Xiu's clothes, but such items had no karmic connection with Chu Xiu. At this moment, Mei Qinglian stood up and said, "I seem to have such an item." Lu Jianghe looked at Mei Qinglian with a strange gaze. "You even have such an item? How close are you to Chu Xiu?" Mei Qinglian glared at him angrily. "What are you thinking?" "I'm just keeping it for Chu Xiu. He might have forgotten about it himself." As she spoke, Mei Qinglian took out a few weapon fragments. everyone found them familiar. They turned out to be Chu Xiu's weapon, the Heavenly Demon Dance. The Heavenly Demon Dance had shattered during the battle in the 6 illusory realms. Back then, when Chu Xiu faked his death and the Heavenly Demon Dance had shattered, Wei Shiya and the others had taken away the fragments of the Heavenly Demon Dance as a memento. However, after Chu Xiu had returned with a new divine weapon, he had forgotten about the Heavenly Demon Dance. Instead, Mei Qinglian had been keeping it. In fact, this saber had been with Chu Xiu for the longest time. Moreover, it could be considered to have been personally forged by Chu Xiu back then. Naturally, it was extremely close to him. Moreover, the Heavenly Demon Dance had followed Chu Xiu for a long time. The karmic connection between them was naturally very deep. Master Yuanji's eyes lit up and he said, "If we have it, there shouldn't be a problem." After saying that, Master Yuanji started to set up a formation, using all his might to make deductions. His attainments in the Tao of divination had already reached the Grandmaster level. Later on, he had obtained the Skycry Demon Venerable's legacy. Although he could not say that he was on par with Su Jing and the others, he was actually not too far off. However, no matter how hard he tried, he could not find Chu Xiu's figure. He could not even find a blurry phantom image. After a long while, Master Yuanji's head was already perspiring slightly. He let out a long breath and said, "Hall Master Lu, I've already tried my best. Even when I used the Heavenly Demon Dance to divine, I couldn't find any traces of official Chu. He is no longer in this world." Lu Jiang he lifted him up, his eyes wide like bells. "What did you say? After obtaining the Skycry Demon Venerable's legacy, you managed to divine such a **T result?" Master Yuanji quickly said, "Hall Master Lu, calm down first. Although I didn't manage to divine any traces of official Chu, it's not like I can't divine whether official Chu is dead or alive. Life and death are the easiest to divine. Life is life, and death is death. However, it's clear that official Chu's current state is beyond my capabilities. In any case, he definitely won't die so easily." Chapter 1082. Everything that Great Master Yuanji had divined could be summed up in one word: nonsense. But nonsense was good. At least it could make the Kunlun devil cult feel at ease for the time being. Although they did not know whether Chu Xiu was alive or dead, as long as there was no confirmation of his death, there would be a chance. Just like Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji, they had not appeared in pugilistic world for 500 years. Almost 99% of the people in pugilistic world thought that they were dead, but Wind's sweeping tower still did not dare to take them off the sovereign list. From the looks of it, they might be on the list for another 500 years. Of course, Chu Xiu could not be compared with Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji, but Chu Xiu's tenacity was also very famous in pugilistic world. Many times, others thought that he would not be able to make it, but in the end, he turned the tables in a desperate situation. Even at the illusory 6 realms, he was directly crushed in front of everyone, but he still appeared in front of them tenaciously. No one dared to say what the result would be this time. Shang Tianliang looked into the distance, and a trace of seriousness flashed in his eyes. "Actually, what I am worried about now is not that kid Chu Xiu. Whether that kid is dead or alive is naturally his destiny. We can't control it even if we want to. But now, it is not good to stay in Kunlun. Don't forget how we came to Kunlun, we cheated. It was fine when that kid Chu Xiu was here, but now that he is gone, it is hard to guarantee that there will not be people who are unhappy with us occupying Kunlun, such as Elysium, or many people." Hearing this news, the hearts of everyone present sank. The higher-ups of the Kunlun devil cult knew about Zhongshanxiu. Zhongshanxiu could protect them for a while, but she could not protect them forever. Chu Xiu had made use of Zhongshanxiu to scare everyone in the pugilistic world. Originally, they thought that their Kunlun demon sect would be able to make use of this opportunity to develop rapidly in the pugilistic world. But who would have thought that before they could even develop, they would be gone? This was extremely awkward. Therefore, they could not guarantee that no one would come looking for trouble. If it was still on the same scale as the last time, they could just prepare to wash up and sleep. Don't think about Kunlun or not Kunlun. They should all go back to their hometown and hide. With this kind of vigilance, 2 months passed just like that. The news of Chu Xiu's death had actually already faded in the martial arts world. When Chu Xiu was alive, no one would talk about him even if he went into seclusion for a few months. Now that he was dead, the popularity could only last for 2 months. New things happened every day in Jianghu. Chu Xiu's case was no longer new. However, what surprised Shang Tianliang and the others even more was that the Elysium did not come looking for trouble even though it was so close to Kunlun. What they didn't know was that Jun Wuxian was still in seclusion to recuperate. The time he spent in seclusion was almost longer than the time he had spent in seclusion to recuperate. To be precise, since Jun Wuxian became the master of the Elysium, only 2 people could hurt him. One was Zhong Xinxiu, and the other was this time. He was also frightened by the mark of Dugu Weiwei. He couldn't figure out what the cause and effect of Chu Xiu was. Therefore, before he went into seclusion, he had given a strict order that no one was allowed to go down the mountain, let alone have a conflict with the Kunlun devil cult. But the Elysium gave up this idea. Some people in the righteous martial arts world wanted to go to Kunlun again. Since Chu Xiu's death, the whole Jianghu had become a lot more peaceful. Because Chu Xiu was not there, part of the forces belonging to the Kunlun devil cult stayed safely on Kunlun Mountain, and some were in their respective territories, keeping a low profile. The same was true for the moon-worshipping cult. After Yi Xiaonan refined the demonic seed, she saw the scene of Zhong Xinxiu's attack. She had some enlightenment, so she went into seclusion. The entire moon-worshipping cult was very low-key. In this environment, most people in the righteous path believed that the so-called revival of the demonic path was actually just the last radiance of the setting sun. Although a difficult and threatening figure like Chu Xiu had appeared, it was actually a flash in the pan. In the end, it didn't set off too much of a storm. Therefore, forces like the Shangshuaying clan, which had previously maintained a neutral position, and the 5 major sword sects, no longer wanted to intervene in this matter. Chu Xiu occupied Kunlun Mountain, which was a threat, but without Chu Xiu, they really didn't put the demonic path remnants on Kunlun Mountain in their eyes. Even Shang Tianliang, who was at the mysterious heaven and earth realm, and Lu Jianghe, the blood demon hall master from 500 years ago, in their opinion, they were not as big of a threat as Chu Xiu. Therefore, after Chu Xiu's death, they were prepared to wait and see. It was okay to suppress them, but they didn't want to force the other party into a desperate situation. After all, the other party was not weak. Moreover, the influence of Zhong Xinxiu was still there. Although Chu Xiu was dead, they didn't know what Zhong Xinxiu's attitude towards the current Kunlun devil cult was. Therefore, after Chu Xiu's death, the Righteous Path alliance that Ling Yunzi had established actually existed in name only. They had joined forces to deal with Chu Xiu before. Now that the biggest threat was gone, what was the point of forming an alliance? To fight and scheme against each other? Even Ling Yunzi, who was the initiator, did not want to make a move. The Chunyang Dao sect had fought with Chu Xiu several times over the years and suffered losses every time. The disciples of the sect had suffered too much damage. Now that the biggest threat, Chu Xiu, was gone, he didn't wish to risk his life against the Kunlun demon sect anymore. If he were to do so, even if he managed to kill all of Shang Tianliang and the others, how much damage would the pure Yang Dao sect suffer? The Diabolists still had to suppress them, but they only needed to cut their flesh with a blunt knife like before, weakening the other party's strength step by step. Only when an enemy as troublesome as Chu Xiu appeared would they have to join forces and kill him swiftly like a bolt of lightning. Although they had failed to kill him several times, Chu Xiu's death had little to do with them. However, the process was not important. What was important was the result. Chu Xiu was dead, and the Chunyang Dao sect should develop its own strength in peace. Moreover, Ling Yunzi's feelings for Chu Xiu were even a little complicated. It was because of Chu Xiu that his state of mind was affected by Chu Xiu. In the end, when he fought with Chu Xiu, he completely figured it out and untied the obsession in his state of mind. It was also because of Chu Xiu. Unconsciously, the cause and effect between him and Chu Xiu had been so deep that it could even be said that they had feelings for each other. Just like what he had said before, if Chu Xiu were to die in the future, he would leave a grave for him in the back mountain of the Chunyang Daoist sect. He would not allow his corpse to be humiliated by others. This was out of respect to an enemy. It was a pity that Chu Xiu was dead now, but his death was inexplicable, and there was no corpse left. As the leader of the Chunyang Dao sect, he should clap his hands and celebrate the death of a great devil. However, as an enemy, and even an enemy who appreciated Chu Xiu, he felt that it would be better if Chu Xiu was killed in the war between the righteous and the devil. Of course, these were only Ling Yunzi's own thoughts, and even Shi Yunzi did not know. The current atmosphere of the Chunyang Dao sect was still a little fanatical. They could not stand their leader sympathizing with a great devil. On the side of the real martial arts cult, Lu Chenglu was not a person with a radical character. Since the Chunyang Dao sect did not intend to take action, Lu Chenglu was also happy to have the peace. It was even more so for the Taoist master mansion. They had not intended to get involved in this matter from the beginning. The others did not want to take action, but the Sabodi Zen monastery and the Great Light Temple had already joined forces and arrived at the foot of the Kunlun mountain. After the absolute threat was gone, the people of Taoism were used to letting nature take its course. However, the Buddhist lineage was more far-sighted. Chu Xiu was dead, but the devil cult still existed. Back then, the devil cult had been suppressed to the point of struggling at death's door, but in the end, they were still able to make a comeback and began to rise, and a person like Chu Xiu appeared. Now that the devil cult had reoccupied the Kunlun mountain, countless martial art practitioners in the underworld openly surrendered to them. The opportunity to rise was much greater than before. Therefore, this time, they definitely couldn't be like the Taoist sect, thinking that the righteous path could relax and be safe without Chu Xiu around. With the combined power of the Great Light Temple and the Sabodi Zen monastery, they did not fantasize about completely destroying the Kunlun devil cult. However, this time, their bottom line was to reseal the rootless sacred flame. The Kunlun devil cult was located on the Dragon Vein, and the rootless sacred flame had been sealed for 500 years. Therefore, the current people did not know how terrifying the rootless sacred flame was, but the monk Bukong from the Sabodi Zen monastery knew. In the past, when the Kunlun devil cult was at its peak, the rootless sacred flame was definitely the most important thing for the Kunlun devil cult to develop the sect. All of the formations in the Kunlun devil cult were built with the power of the rootless sacred flame as the core. As long as the sacred flame was not extinguished, the formations could continue to operate. Moreover, the rootless sacred flame could also be used to refine pills and forge weapons. Back then, all of the weapons and pills of the Kunlun devil cult were refined from the rootless sacred flame. Back then, Dugu Weiwei even used the rootless sacred flame as the core to create a cultivation method, and specially built a sacred fire hall for his disciples to cultivate. Although the rootless sacred flame was difficult to refine, according to Dugu Weiwei's cultivation method, as long as one could absorb a trace of its power, it would be enough to create a large number of low-level martial art practitioners. Now that the Kunlun devil cult was rebuilt, they had yet to fully utilize the rootless sacred flame. Therefore, the two great Buddhist sects were prepared to reseal it at this time. Su Ci asked the monk Bukong, Master Bukong, I heard that the Sabodi Zen monastery paid a huge price to seal the rootless sacred flame back then. With our current strength, can we seal the rootless sacred flame? The monk Bukong looked at the peak of the Kunlun devil cult and smiled. Don't worry. The reason why we paid such a huge price to seal the rootless sacred flame was because the rootless sacred flame was surrounded by the formations of the heaven-weeping demon Venerable. They were already connected to the rootless sacred flame, so we couldn't break the formations first and seal it. That's why we paid such a huge price. Now that those formations are gone, it's much simpler. Chapter 1083. At the peak of the Kunlun devil cult, Shang Tianliang and the others panicked when they heard that the people from the two Buddhist sects had come to fight. Previously, when Chu Xiu was there, the battle array was much larger than now. They were also panicking, but with Chu Xiu at the front, it was as if they had a pillar supporting them, and they had confidence in their hearts. Now, even with Shang Tianliang, who was at the elemental heaven and earth realm, guarding at the front, they were still uncertain. To be honest, not only were they uncertain, but even Shang Tianliang himself was uncertain. He had fought against both Rama and Su Ci, but in the end, he was no match for either of them. Now that the two of them had come together, and one of them was even a powerhouse from 500 years ago, Wukong monk. This made Shang Tianliang even more uncertain. If there was no other way, he could only protect the others and escape. Although his merchant city and the Kunlun devil cult's interests were aligned, he would not fight to the death for the sake of Kunlun Mountain. Buddhist light rose at the foot of Kunlun Mountain. Seeing the people from the Great Light Temple and the Sabodhi Monastery ascend the mountain, all the martial artists who were direct descendants of the demonic path, including Qin Chaoxian, Yumoya, and the others who had some other thoughts, had a look of hatred on their faces. Even if they did not fully acknowledge Chu Xiu or the current Kunlun devil cult, they were still the direct descendants of the demonic Tao. Their ancestors were all part of the Kunlun devil cult, so Kunlun Mountain was a sacred existence to them. In the end, they could not do it again. They had stepped into Kunlun Mountain several times. Although they did not succeed the last time, it was still a humiliation to the demonic Tao. The people from the two Buddhist sects all ascended the mountain. Su Ci saw Shang Tianliang and the others, who were ready for battle. He shook his head and sighed. Master Shang, you should know that Chu Xiu is already dead. You can't defend Kunlun Mountain. Why do you have to be like a mantis trying to stop a chariot? Shang Tianliang laughed coldly. Monk, your words are very interesting. We are mantis trying to stop a chariot. A car made of paper? You want to destroy Kunlun? Fine, I'd like to see if we're the mantis trying to stop a chariot, or if you'll lose a few teeth. Su Ci shook his head again and said, Chu Xiu's death is actually a good thing. A calamity has been averted in the martial world. It's not that Jianghu can't tolerate the devil's path, but it can't tolerate those ambitious villains who want to stir up trouble in Jianghu. Kunlun Mountain is the birthplace of ambition, and the rootless sacred flame is the root of all evil. Therefore, today, we do not wish to kill, but we must seal the rootless sacred flame. There's no room for discussion. Our Buddhist lineage has already taken action, so we don't intend to return empty-handed. If you choose to avoid us, then that is a great merit. If you insist on blocking us, then all I can do is completely shatter the ambitions of your demonic path. When he said the last sentence, Su Ci's body was already surrounded by a dignified Buddhist light. This was enough to represent his stance. The Wukong monk stepped forward and sighed. The rootless sacred flame has been sealed for 500 years. In these 500 years, there hasn't been any major calamity in the martial world. In the end, the rootless sacred flame has just been unsealed, but so many things have happened. This is enough to prove that this object is the source of all evil. 500 years ago, it was this old monk who sealed it. Now, of course, it's my turn to do it. However, those who wanted to stop us 500 years ago have either escaped or died. What will you choose? The Wukong monk looked at Shang Tianliang and the others with an unusually calm gaze. He looked like an ordinary old monk, harmless and harmless. However, no one would treat him as an ordinary old monk. He was able to fight the heartless demon venerable 500 years ago and not die. He was also able to lead the Sabodhi Monastery to destroy the Kunlun devil cult. This Wukong monk's hands were stained with the blood of countless devil's path warriors. In an instant, all the pressure pressed on Shang Tianliang's body. He really couldn't bear it anymore. Just as Shang Tianliang was about to lead his people away from Kunlun and let them have the rootless sacred flame, a powerful demonic aura surged from the foot of Kunlun Mountain. Everyone present looked at each other with hesitation. Who was this? Was it Chu Xiu? There seemed to be something wrong with his aura. Only Chu Wuji vaguely guessed something, and a hint of joy appeared on his face. You bald donkeys make it sound better than a song. A person from the devil's path who has no ambition and can only obediently be your dog is a good person from the devil's path? What a joke. As the voice fell, a powerful demonic aura engulfed the entire peak of Kunlun Mountain. Wuxia's figure descended from the sky, and everyone present was instantly pleasantly surprised. Right now, Wuxia's aura was strong and solid, and his face was even younger than before. Although he still looked like an old man, his essence, qi, and spirit were completely different from before. He had actually stepped into the mysterious heaven and earth state. Ever since Wuxia started refining the Supreme God Pill, he had not come out of seclusion for close to a year. This was because the Supreme God Pill only existed in legends. As for how to refine it and how to refine it, no one knew. Wuxia could only rely on himself to figure it out. Fortunately, Wuxia actually succeeded in breaking through in this 1 year, and stepped into the mysterious heaven and earth state at the last juncture of his lifespan. From now on, Wuxia's lifespan would also increase greatly. At this moment, Su Ci and the others were looking at Wuxia in disbelief. As the most senior and powerful existence in the Hidden Devil clan, they had interacted with Wuxia many times, especially when Chu Xiu had appeared. Because of this, they were very familiar with Wuxia. Although they had to admit that Wuxia's combat power and talent were not weak, he was too old. It could be said that he had lost the qualification to step into the mysterious heaven and earth state. If someone like Wuxia could break through, then the people who should have broken through were the older generation of monks from Sabodhi Zen Monastery and the older generation of martial artists who had been cultivating in seclusion in the back mountain of the Great Light Temple. However, the truth was right in front of them. Wuxia had actually become a powerhouse in the mysterious heaven and earth state. How exactly did he do it? Monk Bukong sighed and said, 500 years ago, we sealed the rootless sacred flame. We paid a great price and sacrificed many of our comrades. I never thought that we would still need to kill people today. Luo Mo did not speak, but he was already prepared to attack. He had always been like this. His actions were always more than his words. Seeing this, all the martial artists from the Kunlun Devil cult looked at Wuxia. Whether they fought or fled, they would listen to Wuxia's orders. Now that Wuxia was standing there, he was equivalent to half a pillar. Even if Chu Xiu was not around, Wuxia could still hold up the fort. All the martial artists from the Devil clan knew what Wuxia had done for the Hidden Devil clan. Even martial artists like Qin Chaoxian and Yumoya, who were on different sides, had to say that they admired Wuxia. For those who were not from the Devil clan but were Chu Xiu's trusted subordinates, Wuxia was Chu Xiu's teacher. He was also an elder whom Chu Xiu treated with respect. Therefore, they naturally had to treat him with respect as well. In this way, Wuxia could stabilize people's hearts in all aspects. Even if he had not stepped into the mysterious heaven and earth state, the effect was still better than Shang Tianliang's. Seal the rootless sacred flame? 500 years ago, the Devil clan was on the decline and we could not stop you. 500 years from now, do you really think that my demonic path lineage can only be slaughtered by you? As Wuxia's voice fell, the next moment, his face was covered by countless mysterious demonic patterns. He formed a seal with both hands and in an instant, the powerful fire pillar of the rootless sacred flame was drawn to his body by Wuxia. The power that originally belonged to the early stages of the mysterious heaven and earth state increased greatly. It even increased to the point that Bukong monk could not see through it. Su Ci and Rama were still fine, but at this moment, Bukong monk's expression, which had always been calm, suddenly became serious. Draw the rootless sacred flame? What kind of technique was this? The rootless sacred flame was one of the core treasures of the Kunlun Devil cult in the past. It could be used to forge weapons, refine pills, and even extract some of its power for cultivation. However, he had never heard of anyone being able to draw the power of the rootless sacred flame. At the very least, the 4 great demon lords of the past had not been able to do so. The rootless sacred flame was born in the dragon's vein. To be more precise, it was also the power of heaven and earth. However, it was the pinnacle of heaven and earth power, the kind that could not be controlled. Hence, the technique that Wuxia was using now did not make sense. After being possessed by the rootless sacred flame, Wuxia's temperament seemed to have been tainted with a sense of irascibility. He punched out, and the silver rootless sacred flame swept out. A powerful force wrapped around the power of heaven and earth. With a loud bang, it exploded and attacked the group of Buddhist martial artists. Retreat! Su Ci bellowed out as an endless, resplendent Buddha light shone out from his hands. Thousands and thousands of Buddhist countries were born from within. Every single one of those Buddhas seemed to be chanting out their Buddhist mantras. Instantly, Buddhist chants rang out, wanting to stop the rootless saint flame. However, what kind of power was the rootless sacred flame? It was the purest power of heaven and earth. It was so pure that it had already evolved into a physical form. The powerful force directly melted Su Ci's thousands of Buddhist countries, leaving only the lingering sound of Buddhist chants in their ears. In the next moment, Rama took a step forward. Golden lotuses rose under his feet. Every golden lotus swallowed the rootless sacred flame. However, they could not last for long before they were melted. Monk Bukong sighed. The Kunlun devil cult from 500 years ago was actually not easy to deal with. He put his palms together and the surrounding Buddhist light and vital energy were constantly stirred. The dazzling golden Buddhist light filled the ground and dyed the sky gold. At this moment, the golden Buddhist light condensed into a huge Buddha that was hundreds of feet tall. The most peculiar thing was that the Buddha looked 80% similar to Monk Bukong. Chapter 1084. The strength that Wuxia had displayed was enough to astonish anyone. The few heaven and earth mysterious realm powerhouses present all came from the early stage. They knew what the strength of a martial artist who had just stepped into this realm should be like. They were already very surprised that Wuxia had entered the elemental illuminating realm at such a young age. However, what was up with his combat power? This was simply illogical. He was able to suppress 3 Buddhist sect experts at the same time. This kind of strength was probably close to moon-worshipping sect Xiaonan. Wuxia grabbed casually and a huge pillar of fire was directly held in his hand. He smashed it down like a staff that could overturn rivers and seas. The 1,000-foot-tall Buddha that Bukong monk had conjured formed a Buddhist seal and took the blow head-on. However, it began to crack under the force of the blow. Su Ci and Luo Mo quickly followed suit. However, as Wuxia waved his other hand, countless rootless sacred flames turned into arrows and shot out explosively, covering the entire sky. The power of the arrows was so strong that Su Ci and Luo Mo could only barely block them. Both of their expressions changed, and they quickly retreated. Even Bukong monk stopped his attack and retreated. There was no way they could continue fighting this battle. They were not fighting Wuxia at all. Instead, they were fighting the rootless sacred fire that had condensed above the dragon vein. As a powerful entity that had evolved from the dragon vein's power, the power contained in the rootless sacred fire was definitely beyond a warrior's imagination. Once it was used, no one could block it. Wuxia said coldly, "Our saint sect is facing a change. We do not want to cause trouble at this time. However, if you continue to force us, our saint sect will definitely fight to the end." Su Ci and the rest looked at each other. They had no choice but to recite the name of Buddha and leave without any hesitation. They could also see that Wuxia's condition was definitely not right. He must have obtained some kind of secret technique that allowed him to control the rootless sacred fire. However, it was obvious that he could only control the rootless sacred fire at the peak of Kunlun Mountain. He could not do it any further. Even so, as long as Wuxia was guarding this place, they could not touch the current Kunlun devil cult. They could only retreat for now. When they reached the foot of the mountain, Su Ci sighed and said, "It seems like the demonic Tao is not fated to die." Initially, with Chu Xiu's death, it should have been the best opportunity for them to deal a blow to the Kunlun demon sect. But in the end, they just had to bump into Wuxia, who had stepped into the heaven and earth elemental opening realm and was even able to control the rootless saint flame to burst forth with such immense power. This time around, they truly couldn't do anything to the Kunlun demon sect. At this moment, on Mount Kunlun, everyone cheered when they saw Wuxia easily forcing back the people from the two Buddhist sections. However, at this moment, Wuxia's body swayed, and his face instantly turned pale. Chu Wuji quickly helped Wuxia up and asked, "Elder Wei, are you alright?" Wuxia let out a long sigh and shook his head. "I'm fine. It's just that the power of the rootless sacred flame is too strong. It's so strong that even though I can control it, I can't withstand the impact of its power." Speaking of which, Wuxia was able to step into the heaven and earth mystic illumination realm and possess such powerful battle power. It was all thanks to the Supreme God Pill that Chu Xiu had given him. The effects of the Supreme God Pill were even better than everyone had imagined. Moreover, the Skycry Demon Venerable had left behind many things in it. Wuxia only realized after he stepped into the heaven and earth mystic illumination realm that the Skycry Demon Venerable had asked Dugu Weiwei to refine a trace of the rootless sacred flame source energy into the Supreme God Pill. Then, he had used the rootless sacred flame to refine the Supreme God Pill. With this trace of the rootless sacred flame source energy, a martial artist would be able to trigger this power in the vicinity of the rootless sacred flame and release an extremely powerful force. When the Demon Venerable had refined the Supreme God Pill, he had not intended to use it himself. Instead, he had wanted to create another Demon Venerable in the heaven and earth mystic illumination realm to control the rootless sacred flame and the surrounding array. Sometimes, when the sect master and the four great Demon Venerables were not around, the new Demon Venerable would be responsible for guarding the Kunlun devil cult. With the rootless sacred flame source energy, it would be extremely difficult to defeat him at the peak of the Kunlun mountain. Unfortunately, the Kunlun devil cult had been annihilated before the Skycry Demon Venerable could find someone who met his requirements. This information was engraved in the deepest part of the Supreme God Pill. After Wuxia had refined the Supreme God Pill, he automatically knew about it. After he came out of seclusion, the martial artist who had stayed behind in the Jianghu Hall quickly briefed him on what had happened during this period of time. Before he could grieve over Chu Xiu's death, he had a bad feeling. With Chu Xiu's death, the other righteous sects would definitely not tolerate the sacred cult continuing to occupy the Kunlun mountain. They would definitely come looking for trouble. Therefore, Wuxia immediately came to Kunlun to support them. Fortunately, he was not too late and was just in time. Of course, this was also because Su Ci and the others did not know Wuxia's background. They thought that he could borrow the rootless sacred flame's power without limit. Although in theory, it was indeed limitless, the prerequisite was that one had to be able to withstand the impact of this power. Otherwise, if they continued to attack, Wuxia might be the first to be unable to withstand it. After panting for a while, Wuxia said in a low voice, "Chu Xiu, what exactly happened?" After Lu Jianghe and Mei Qinglian told Wuxia everything that had happened, Wuxia looked to the west and said in a low voice, "It should be Jun Wuxian. The others do not have this kind of strength, nor do they have this kind of reason. Alright, disperse. From now on, do not leave the Kunlun mountain unless it is necessary. Our saint sect has been divided for so many years. Now that we have finally gathered together, and with the support of the rootless sacred flame, we can have anything we want. If we don't take advantage of this opportunity to accumulate strength, when will we? This time, we have forced the Buddhists to retreat. As long as we do not be too high profile, at least in a short period of time, no one will come looking for us." Mei Qinglian said in a low voice, "Old Wei, you don't seem to be worried about Chu Xiu?" Wuxia smiled bitterly. "What's the use of worrying? But I believe that he will not die." "Why?" Wuxia pointed to himself. "Intuition. It's just like when I decided to choose that kid as my successor. Life and death are up to fate. I've chosen Chu Xiu as my successor, and all I can do is to help him stabilize his faction. As for the other things, he'll have to rely on himself to fight for them. I am not sure if he will live or die this time. But even if I am worried, I can't help. What's the point? Do your own thing and leave the rest to the heavens. How can it be easy to go from the bottom to the top? There are countless trials and tribulations. Who hasn't experienced life and death a few times? Wait patiently. If Chu Xiu can come back, our sacred cult will once again be famous in the martial world. If Chu Xiu doesn't come back, then it only means that the heavens are not protecting the diabolism. Instead of worrying, it's better to let it go. Wuxia had lived for hundreds of years, and he had weathered many storms in his life. He had been through more life and death situations than anyone else. The others couldn't let it go, but he had already let it go before he came. With Wuxia's words, the others were relieved and began to prepare to seal the mountain. But Wuxia wasn't as indifferent as he looked. All these years, Wuxia had poured a lot of effort into Chu Xiu. He and Chu Xiu weren't master and disciple, but they were more like master and disciple. He had passed on everything he had to Chu Xiu. Although Chu Xiu wasn't his disciple, he was his successor and the future hope of the sacred cult. Now that Chu Xiu's life and death were unknown, he was worried. But he couldn't show any of these worries in front of others. Looking back at the busy Kunlun mountain, Wuxia sighed softly. At the very least, the Hidden Devil clan had been completely united, and was not as divided as before. Kunlun mountain was once again in their hands. Now, it was better than before. Chu Xiu slowly woke up in the middle of the dense forest that covered the sky and covered the earth. However, he had a splitting headache. He checked the injuries on his body. They were very serious. Before using the supernatural power, Chu Xiu had used the blood demon transformation technique and spirit ignition. These actions had almost hollowed out his entire body. Although he didn't know whether or not his origin source had been damaged, his current combat strength had undoubtedly been reduced by 99%. He needed to recover his strength. Chu Xiu took out his space box and took out a lot of things. These things were taken from the space by Chu Xiu. They were the things that were scattered in Dugu Weiwei's space box in the past. There were materials, cultivation methods, elixirs, and so on. But it was a pity that Chu Xiu couldn't use these materials at the moment, whether it was refining weapons or setting up formations. As for those cultivation methods, Chu Xiu could only use a few, because Dugu Weiwei's real core cultivation methods weren't here. In fact, it was normal to think about it. How could he record Dugu Weiwei's core cultivation methods like Misty Slash and Break Formula's Saber Intent? He only recorded the cultivation methods that had been abandoned long ago, preparing to pass them down and leave them to others. Chu Xiu didn't have time to care about this for the time being. He took out a pill and swallowed it. He opened it and saw that it was a pill of the same level as the Green Dragon Emu Wood Heaven Reversing Life Transformation pill. When he opened the bottles of the other pills, they were all top-grade pills. None of them were lower than 8th revolution. Sighing at the extravagance, Chu Xiu was also extravagant. He directly poured the pills into his mouth, like eating jelly beans. Anyway, his physical body was strong, so he didn't have to worry that his body wouldn't be able to withstand refining these pills. With the support of these powerful medicinal pills, it only took half a month for Chu Xiu's internal injuries to be completely healed. However, the power of his primordial spirit had only recovered by 90%. He still needed to recuperate in order to slowly recover. Of course, this result was already very good. Most cultivators would hurt their origin if they burned their primordial spirit. Chu Xiu was already very lucky to be able to recuperate at this time. At this time, Chu Xiu was ready to look at the surrounding world. He already knew that he should have arrived in another world. Chapter 1085. Which level of heaven did the sky key lead to? Previously, Chu Xiu had been puzzled. Now, he finally understood. The sky key did not lead to the normal heaven, but another, heaven and earth. The trees in this place were almost the same as the other space that Chu Xiu had seen in the space before. Most importantly, the qi of heaven and earth here was extremely rich. It was even richer than the qi of heaven and earth in the Xiaofan mystery realm in the previous world. Guo Xiaofeng had guarded that place for decades with the cultivation of the true fire and the spirit refinement realm. Just the aura that seeped through could allow him to step into the mysterious realm of heaven and earth. One could imagine the benefits of this rich qi of heaven and earth for a cultivator. Not only could it make your cultivation smoother, but it could also bring you closer to this world. Chu Xiu heaved a sigh of relief. It was only after arriving here that he came to a sudden realization. He finally figured out some things that he hadn't understood before. Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji must have come to this world. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to not find any news about them in the lower realm. There were too many things on him that were closely related to Dugu Weiwei. Previously, Chu Xiu had never given up the intention of looking for clues about Dugu Weiwei. However, he had no clue. He was ready to wait until he stood at the peak of the pugilistic world before using all the forces to search. Now, before he could stand at the peak of the pugilistic world, the clues were already in front of him. There was also the Elysium. Previously, Chu Xiu had always felt that the Elysium was very strange. Now, it seemed that the Elysium was also related to this world. The Elysium was looking for the sky key all over the world. In fact, the sky key only had one function, and that was to prevent people from being completely strangled by the powerful heaven and earth power when crossing between two worlds. The sky key could help Chu Xiu go back and forth between Green Capital before. It could be used repeatedly. However, after transmigrating to this world, Chu Xiu discovered that there were no longer any traces of the supreme key in his body. Moreover, there were no spatial cracks or other such things around him. Evidently, he could not return for the time being. However, Chu Xiu was not worried. As long as he was alive, there would always be a way to go back. Moreover, it might even be related to the Elysium. The reason why the Elysium collected the heavenly keys was definitely not because he wanted to go to this world. Over the years, Chu Xiu did not know how many heavenly keys the Elysium had collected, but it was definitely not a small number. If the Gate of Heaven was really a gateway between the two worlds, then if the people of the Gate of Heaven wanted to go to this world, it would definitely be enough for the Gate Master and the 9 great divine generals to go. However, over so many years, none of the masters or immortal generals of the Elysium Gate had disappeared. In Chu Xiu's opinion, the Elysium Gate didn't collect the sky-reaching keys for this world, but to prevent others from entering this world. If the Gate of Heaven was the gatekeeper, then it was hard to say whether they were the gatekeepers of the lower realm or the gatekeepers of this world. Chu Xiu did not think too much about these messy matters. It would not be too late to talk about them when he returned to the lower realm. Anyway, he still had a score to settle with the Elysium. Thinking of Jun Wuxian's plot, a cold light flashed in Chu Xiu's eyes. This time, he had indeed underestimated Jun Wuxian. He thought that Jun Wuxian would be frightened by Zhongshanxiu. He did not expect that Jun Wuxian would not give up on killing him. A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. The next time Chu Xiu attacked the Elysium Gate, it would probably be the time when the Elysium Gate was destroyed. 500 years ago, why Dugu Weiwei had let the Elysium Gate off, Chu Xiu did not know. But this time, it was him. No matter how great the reason was, it would not stop him from destroying the Elysium Gate. This time, Chu Xiu could be considered lucky. He had a lot of cards up his sleeves, and in the end, he managed to escape. But he had also ended up here. But this might be a good thing. Chu Xiu had always liked to plan before taking action. During the time he was recuperating, Chu Xiu had actually thought it through. Perhaps it was not a bad thing for him to end up here. Over at the Kunlun Mountain, the righteous sects saw him as a thorn in their side. Now that he was dead, it was actually a way to reduce the pressure on Wuxia and the others. Even if there were still some righteous sects who were unwilling to let him go, with their strength, they would be able to protect themselves. At most, they would just give up on Kunlun Mountain. In the lower realm, he had too many restrictions, and there were too many enemies. But in this strange world, he could let Chu Xiu do whatever he wanted. Most importantly, here, Chu Xiu's strength would definitely improve faster than in the lower realm. The essence of the world here was unusually thick. Although at the mysterious heaven and earth realm, the thickness of the essence of the world did not have much to do with one's cultivation. But places with thick essence of the world were closer to heaven and earth. For a martial artist, their perception would increase exponentially, and the speed of breaking through would naturally increase. Of course, the premise was that one had to be qualified to break through to the mysterious heaven and earth realm. Also, here, Chu Xiu might be able to find traces of Dugu Weiwei. Regardless of whether Dugu Weiwei was dead or alive, there had to be a result. Was he an independent person, or was he somehow related to Dugu Weiwei? This was something that Chu Xiu had to figure out. As he walked, these questions echoed in Chu Xiu's mind. However, he had already walked for more than 2 hours, and he still had not walked out of this primeval forest. This made Chu Xiu a little surprised. He wasn't walking normally. He had crossed a distance of hundreds of meters in a single leap, and his speed was very fast. He had probably walked hundreds of miles in an hour, but he still couldn't see the end of this forest. Is this a place similar to the 100,000 mountains in the lower realm? Thinking about it carefully, it was really possible. Guo Xiaofeng said that only one person had entered this place in 500 years, and he was unlucky enough to encounter Fang Qinglan, the powerhouse of the legendary list of the previous generation, and was killed. If this place was not remote, it would have been found long ago. At this moment, there was a shout in the distance. In Chu Xiu's perception, a group of martial artists was chasing a young woman. The woman was beautiful, but she had the unique heroic spirit of a martial artist. Looking at her appearance, she was in her 20s. In Chu Xiu's perception, her actual age should not be too old. The most important thing was that this woman actually had the cultivation of the real pellet state, which was very amazing. It was naturally more difficult for women to practice martial arts than men. Among the martial artists on the Longhu list in Chu Xiu's generation, Yan Fian of the Yunu Palace was only in her 20s. Luo Feiheng also stepped into the real pellet state at the age of 30. Chu Xiu also asked when Mei Qinglian stepped into the real pellet state, but he was rebuked by Mei Qinglian that a woman's age shouldn't be asked casually. Although Chu Xiu didn't know what the age of breakthrough had to do with the real age, he didn't dare to ask much. However, when Mei Qinglian stepped into the real pellet state, she must have been over 30 years old. Is the threshold of this world too low, or does he just walk around casually and meet a talented young master? The people who chased the woman seemed very normal. There were a total of 5 real pellet state martial artists. They were either middle-aged or old, and they seemed to belong to different sections. The woman was holding a green long sword. She was fleeing while blocking. Her combat experience was extremely rich. She wasn't just a vase. The older generation martial artists of your sex joined forces to chase a weak woman like me. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by many martial artists in Fonglin Commandery? Chu Xiu could understand the woman's words, but he didn't quite understand it. He was now sure that the people in this world were really the descendants of those who left in the ancient Great Calamity. The pronunciation and tone of their speech were different from the martial artists in Chu Xiu's world, but they were of the same origin. Therefore, although Chu Xiu couldn't understand some of it, he had read a lot of classics after all, so he could still understand most of it. It was almost like listening to a dialect. An old man with an aquiline nose who was leading the chase said coldly, "Weak woman? If Miss Fengwu Bloody Sword Lin Fengwu of 9 Phoenix Sword Sect is a weak woman, then what are those people who died under your sword? My disciple is innocent. Just because of a few words, you crippled her descendant. How can she be called a weak woman? Besides, you are courting death this time. Your father has already promised to share the heavenly absolute sword with us, but you insist on intercepting, then don't blame us for being ruthless." Lin Fengwu snorted lightly. "Your disciple, that kind of trash, dares to flirt with me, and he even dares to point fingers at my 9 Phoenix Sword Sect. Crippling his descendant is already my mercy. As for the heavenly extinction sword technique, it took the 9 Phoenix Sword Sect several years of hard work to collect all the fragments and restore it. Why do you think you can share it just because you want to? Why don't you take out your sect's secret classics to share with my 9 Phoenix Sword Sect?" In just a few words, Chu Xiu had almost heard everything. He shook his head. It was meaningless. It was nothing more than a case of an innocent man getting into trouble because of his wealth. The Nine Phoenix Sword sect had obtained something that people coveted, but they did not have the strength to keep it. The girl's father was more cowardly, or rather, he was sensible, so he was prepared to take out something to calm things down. The girl's character was stubborn, but it was obvious that her breasts were quite big, but her brain was not enough. Fighting head-on also required the ability to fight head-on. If one did not have the strength to fight head-on, then the situation would be very miserable, just like what was happening now. As they spoke, the group of people had already appeared in front of Chu Xiu. Lin Fengwu did not expect that there would be people here. She was just about to call for help, but Chu Xiu stepped aside and said indifferently, "Everyone, continue." Seeing Chu Xiu's action, Lin Fengwu, who was running away, almost lost control of her earth energy. A beautiful and weak woman like her was being chased by a group of ferocious men. Shouldn't the normal routine be to be a hero saving the beauty? Even if he didn't save her, he should have helped to call for help. This guy actually stepped aside so boldly, it was simply unreasonable. Chapter 1086. Chu Xiu was actually a person who didn't like to meddle in other people's business. He had always been too lazy to meddle in matters that didn't involve him, unless he could see enough benefits. With Chu Xiu's current strength, whether it was Lin Fengwu or those pursuers, in Chu Xiu's eyes, their strength was almost like that of an ant, and he could kill them with a wave of his hand. Chu Xiu could meddle in this kind of business when he was in a good mood, but he could also meddle in it when he was in a bad mood. But right now, Chu Xiu's mood was more complicated, so he didn't want to meddle in it. Chu Xiu had just arrived, and if these fellows had some sort of power behind them, it would still be troublesome even if he wasn't afraid. Before figuring out the ins and outs of this world, Chu Xiu didn't want to cause any trouble. But he didn't want to cause trouble, and some people saw him as trouble. Those pursuers were already shocked when they saw Chu Xiu. With so many of them chasing Lin Fengwu, it didn't sound good. Moreover, they were also afraid that if they pushed Lin Fengwu's father into a corner, he would fight to the death with them. Therefore, they had devised a plan to force him into the Dilua Mountains, where no one had ever tread. If he died here, not even his bones would be found. Although the Dilua mountain range was a huge mountain range that spanned across the eastern and northern regions, the mountain range near their Fenglin prefecture was very barren, and there were very few people picking herbs. Therefore, they felt at ease to chase Lin Fengwu here. They didn't expect to meet a living person here, and looking at the other party's appearance, he didn't look like a martial artist picking herbs at all. His accent and clothes were very strange, and it was obviously very suspicious. One of them suddenly said, "I seem to have heard of something." The ancestor of the Lin family of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect was from the northern mysterious heaven realm. This guy is dressed in black, and his accent is so strange. Is he the reinforcement that Lin Yazi invited from the mysterious heaven realm? Only people from the mysterious heaven realm like to wear black the most. Sect Master once said that Lin Yazi seems to be timid and cautious, but he has many schemes in his heart. Could it be that he is pretending to flatter us, but in the end, he is secretly calling for reinforcements from the mysterious heaven realm? Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. What was wrong with these people's brains? Just because they liked to wear black, they were from the mysterious heaven realm? Did black clothes offend you? I'm not from the mysterious heaven realm. Chu Xiu shook his head. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in the eyes of the old man in the lead. It doesn't matter if he is or not. He saw us kill someone today. Leaving him alive will always be troublesome. Let's kill him together. At this moment, Chu Xiu did not reveal his own strength. As he had just arrived, he had to keep a low profile. Therefore, Chu Xiu had almost restrained his own strength to the extreme. He was prepared to observe this world coldly before coming up with other plans. Therefore, after these people sensed no danger from Chu Xiu and looked at Chu Xiu's face, they subconsciously thought that he was an ordinary low-level martial artist. However, they neglected the fact that even if Chu Xiu was a low-level warrior, none of them could clearly see Chu Xiu's realm. Looking at those people, Chu Xiu shook his head gently and sighed. Not bad. You would rather kill wrongly than let go. You're ruthless and vicious. You're very methodical in doing things. However, there's one thing you need to strengthen, and that's your eyesight. But there's no way for you to make up for it now. Maybe in your next life. Before those people could react, Chu Xiu gently snapped his fingers. The 5 bloodlines around his body twisted and floated. The next moment, all the power of qi and blood in the 5 people's bodies began to boil. The 5 people seemed to be filled with air. Their bodies swelled, and in the next moment, they directly exploded into a cloud of blood mist. With a wave of his hand, the 5 bloodlines disappeared. Chu Xiu turned his gaze to Lin Fengwu, causing the girl to suddenly scream in horror. Lin Fengwu was not an ordinary young miss of an aristocratic family. On the contrary, she was the only daughter of her father, Lin Yazi. He had always raised her as his successor. She had been practicing martial arts and fighting like an ordinary martial artist. She had killed a lot of people. However, no matter how experienced she was, she had never seen a killing method as horrifying as Chu Xiu's. With a snap of his fingers, the 5 people seemed to have been blown up, and they completely turned into a cloud of blood mist. It was only now that Lin Fengwu realized that although the guy in front of her looked like an ordinary person, she actually could not see through his cultivation. Chu Xiu looked at Lin Fengwu and said calmly, "Miss, didn't you want me to save you just now? Now that I've saved you, what's your name? Am I that scary?" Lin Fengwu thought to herself, "Of course you're scary. You're much scarier than those guys who were chasing after me." Although that was what she thought, Lin Fengwu still bowed to Chu Xiu respectfully. She said in a low voice, "Thank you, senior, for your help." She could not see through Chu Xiu's background, nor did she know what kind of existence he was. Therefore, she could only address him as senior. Chu Xiu nodded. The people had already been killed. If there was any trouble, it was a matter for the future. He could just ask the girl in front of him about the situation in this side of the world. As for whether Lin Fengwu would play tricks on him, Chu Xiu was not worried at all. In the face of absolute power, any schemes were weak and laughable. "Where is this?" Chu Xiu asked directly. Lin Fengwu was stunned. It seemed that she did not expect Chu Xiu to ask such a question. "This is a part of the Dilua Mountains in Fanglin Prefecture." "And where is Fanglin Prefecture?" Lin Fengwu was stunned again. She said carefully, "It's the East region." "What about outside the East region?" Lin Fengwu did not know how to answer. She was now a little suspicious about whether there was something wrong with the other party. Legend had it that some senior experts had gone into seclusion for a long time, or had some accidents that caused their brains to have problems. That was what happened. Some of the more serious ones would even turn into lunatics and kill indiscriminately. Feeling that Chu Xiu's gaze was fixed on her, Lin Fengwu was a little flustered. She said, "What other place is there outside the East region?" The Daoist continent only has the East, South, West, and North regions, as well as the Daoist Divine Palace in the center. The surrounding boundless sea is full of storms. Even those martial immortal experts have not been able to reach the end. Chu Xiu nodded slightly in his heart. So this place was the Daoist. He seemed to have heard of this name somewhere. He remembered that in the lower realm, there seemed to be a mortal boundary monument. On it was written Upper Mortal Heaven, and there was also a secret realm called Lesser Mortal Heaven. Could it be that the lower realm was called Mortal Heaven, and this world was called Daoist? Seeing that Lin Fengwu was looking at him with a strange gaze, Chu Xiu said calmly, "Don't be surprised. I've been cultivating with my master in the depths of the mountains since I was young, and I only have the right to come out and walk the martial world now. In this life, I only have martial arts as my companion. My master can't be bothered to teach me anything else, and I can't be bothered to learn it either." Chu Xiu had casually made up a story about his background. He made it sound as if it was the truth, without the slightest bit of awkwardness. At that moment, Lin Fengwu felt relieved. No wonder he looked so young, but his abilities were so terrifying. It turned out that he was a disciple taught by those hidden experts. His accent was so strange. It was probably because he did not speak all year round and focused on cultivating martial arts. People's imagination was very strong. Chu Xiu had casually made up an identity, but Lin Fengwu had automatically made up those unreasonable parts to be more reasonable. Perhaps because she knew that the Chu Xiu before her would not threaten her safety, Lin Fengwu finally breathed a sigh of relief. She cupped her hands and said, "I'm Lin Fengwu from the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect. May I ask for senior's name?" "Chu Xiu." Lin Fengwu's eyes turned, and she suddenly said, "Senior Chu, you've stepped into the Jianghu under the orders of your master. At this time, you probably don't have a place to stay. Why don't you temporarily stay at my Nine Phoenix Sword Sect? Take it as me repaying you for saving my life." Chu Xiu did not speak. He just stared into Lin Fengwu's eyes. At that moment, Lin Fengwu had goosebumps all over her body. It was as if she had been stripped naked. The thoughts and calculations in the depths of her heart were all exposed before Chu Xiu's eyes. That pressure instantly made her sweat all over, and her eyes revealed a look of fear. "You want to use me?" Chu Xiu withdrew his pressure and said indifferently, "An innocent man will get into trouble because of his wealth. According to what those fellows said earlier, your Nine Phoenix Sword Sect obtained a treasure, and it attracted trouble. It's very dangerous now. You saw my strength, and you want to bring me back. When others come to fight, you want to use me as a shield to ward off these dangers." Lin Fengwu had a panicked look on her face, and she hurriedly said, "Senior, please forgive me. I really have no intention of harming you. It's just that my Nine Phoenix Sword Sect is on the verge of destruction, so I promise you." Lin Fengwu swallowed the rest of her words. She immediately had a blank look on her face, as if she had heard something wrong. "Senior, what did you say?" Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Didn't you want to invite me back to the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect? I can agree to your request. I also know that you have no intention of harming me. If you really have such intentions, do you think you can still stand here and talk to me calmly?" As he spoke, Chu Xiu glanced to the side. Lin Fengwu saw the blood mist that had yet to dissipate, and she immediately shivered again. At this time, she was really a little afraid of Chu Xiu. The other party could see through all her thoughts and schemes at a glance, and she could not figure out what this mysterious senior in front of her was thinking at all. Moreover, his personality was simply temperamental, and it was hard to figure out. Lin Fengwu said cautiously, "Senior, you know that I want to use you, so why did you still agree?" Chu Xiu had a strange look on his face, and he looked up at the sky and said, "My master once said that martial arts cultivates the soul, and the secular world cultivates the heart. With strength, there can be no loopholes in the cultivation of the state of mind. Everything in the world has karma. Me meeting you is karma, and killing that bunch of guys is also karma. Karma, these two words, can't be avoided, can't be avoided. Only by being in it can one understand the mystery." If Mei Qinglian and the others saw Chu Xiu like this, they would definitely be able to guess that Chu Xiu was imitating Zhong Xinxiu's strange look, and that he only said half of what he wanted to say. But needless to say, the more he acted like this, the more Lin Fengwu felt that this senior in front of her was simply unfathomable, and what he said was very reasonable. Chapter 1087. Chu Xiu was willing to agree to Lin Fengwu's request. Of course, it was not because of her big breasts, but because Chu Xiu suddenly realized that if he entered the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect, it would actually be easier for him to find out information about this world than if he were to hide as a low-level warrior. According to the previous conversation, Chu Xiu knew that the Daoist people were divided into 4 regions: East, West, South, and North. This Nine Phoenix Sword Sect was one of the sects in Fonglin County in the East region. Moreover, the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect strength in Fonglin County should be below average. The reason was very simple. If the other party was really strong enough, it would not attract the covetous eyes of several sects, and they would not dare to send people to join forces to assassinate Lin Fengwu, the daughter of the sect master. Of course, the Nine Phoenix Sword Sect strength would not be weak. If it was really weak to the point that it could not withstand a single blow, then the people from these sects would not have to spend so much effort. They could just go straight to the other party and destroy it. Obviously, the Nine Phoenix Sword sect also had some strength, and the other party was also afraid that they would fight to the death. On the way to the Dilua mountain range, Lin Fengwu led the way in front, while Chu Xiu asked from behind, "Miss Lin, I also want to ask you about someone from 500 years ago." Lin Fengwu said doubtfully, "Someone from 500 years ago? If the other party is very strong and can shake the Daoist people, I should know about it. May I know who Senior Chu wants to know about?" Chu Xiu said with narrowed eyes, "That person was once the enemy of my ancestors. Back then, my ancestors were forced to live in seclusion in the mountains, and it was actually related to that person. This time, when I traveled the martial world, Master also told me that if I find that person's disciple, I must definitely defeat him and regain my breath. That person is called Dugu Weiwei. Given Dugu Weiwei's character, as long as he came to the celestial Great Law Plain and got into a conflict with the local forces, there would definitely be no way for him to settle things peacefully. Who knows, he might even establish another devil cult in the celestial Great Law Plain. Therefore, if Chu Xiu claimed to be the other party's enemy, there would be less trouble." Lin Fengwu said doubtfully, "Dugu Weiwei? I've never heard of this name." Chu Xiu frowned slightly. "Not even a little bit of reputation?" Seeing that Chu Xiu was frowning, Lin Fengwu was afraid that he would get angry, so she quickly said, "Senior Chu, don't be. I don't care much about these things. Now, I can only name a few Daoist experts. My father should know." Seeing Chu Xiu frown, Lin Fengwu was afraid that he would get angry, so she quickly said, "Senior Chu, please don't be impatient. I don't usually pay much attention to these things. Right now, there are only a few experts in the celestial Daluo that I can name. My father should know." Chu Xiu nodded. As he walked with Lin Fengwu, he tried to find out more information about Daluo heaven through their casual conversation. Chu Xiu nodded. As he walked with Lin Fengwu, he got to know most of the information about the Daluocean. Lin Fengwu was a little scheming, but in reality, she had big breasts but no brains. It was easy for Chu Xiu to get information out of her. The biggest difference between the Daluocean and the lower realm was not that the heaven and earth essence was richer, but that the system was different. There were no dynasties here, only territories ruled by various top sections. In the lower realms, martial artists were the minority. Even if it was a low-level martial artist who was proficient in some fist and leg techniques, they were still the minority compared to ordinary people. In the lower realm, experts were the minority. Even low-level experts, who were proficient in fist and leg techniques, were the minority compared to ordinary people. The essence chi here was rich, so it was not too barren. There were abundant resources, and there was almost no famine. Moreover, ordinary people grew up in such heaven and earth essence, so their lifespan and strength were naturally longer. Centenarians could be seen everywhere in the Daluocean. If the people here practiced martial arts, the three realms of body refining, body tempering, blood condensation, and inborn realm were just for children to lay the foundation. Only those in the inborn realm were qualified to be called martial artists. A martial artist in the real pellet state like Lin Fengwu was of course not qualified to be called a grandmaster. She could only be regarded as an expert. However, it was precisely because of such a favorable environment that Chu Xiu discovered that the cultivators of the exalted heaven were weaker in terms of ability. Or it could be said that the amount of scheming, killing, and tempering they experienced was too little. At the very least, it was much less than the cultivators of the lower realms. For example, Lin Fengwu. Although she behaved very badly in front of Chu Xiu with big breasts and no brains, some of her little schemes were easily seen through by Chu Xiu. However, in reality, she was the most outstanding martial artist of the younger generation in Fonglin County. In fact, she was second to none. This time, the heavenly absolute sword record obtained by the Lin family was very precious. Although it was not created by the martial immortal powerhouse, it was modified by him, which attracted the covetous eyes of several other major sections. Otherwise, if there was any conflict, everyone could resolve it through discussion. Regarding the martial immortal realm, Chu Xiu had studied it for a long time when he was in the lower realm. He believed that it was a realm above the heaven and earth realm. When he arrived at the Daoist, Chu Xiu could finally confirm that the martial immortal realm was indeed beyond the heaven and earth realm. Martial immortal was comparable to the gods and Buddhas of heaven and earth. He was the strongest person in the Daoist. Only those top major sects had such a powerhouse. Along the way, Chu Xiu learned a lot of things calmly. After walking for nearly a day, he walked out of this primitive jungle. Of course, this was because Chu Xiu was taking care of Lin Fengwu's speed. Otherwise, it would only take a few hours. After entering Fonglin County, Chu Xiu finally saw the normal appearance of the Daoist. The first impression that the Daoist cities, or the cities in Fonglin County, gave Chu Xiu was that they were big, very big. Some of the cities he passed by, even if they were just ordinary small cities, had neatly piled walls made of huge bluestones. Almost all of them were shorter than 10 feet. There were also some villages that had been built in the shape of fortresses. The area was not small either. There were many martial artists in the Daoist. Even ordinary people, under the nourishment of the qi of heaven and earth, were much stronger than those in the lower realm. Therefore, it was not hard for them to build these things. The Nine Phoenix Sword sect was on the Nine Immortal Mountain in the south of Fonglin County. Because there were 9 slender boulders standing at the highest point of the mountain, it was like an immortal looking at the sky and preparing to ascend, so it was called Nine Immortal Mountain. Although Lin Fengwu's performance in front of Chu Xiu was a little poor, she still seemed to have a lot of prestige in Nine Phoenix Sword sect. When the disciples of Nine Phoenix Sword sect saw Lin Fengwu on the mountain road, they shouted in surprise, "Senior sister is back." When she walked to the front of the mountain gate, someone had already come out to greet her. It was a young man in his 30s. He looked handsome. Although he also had the strength of the real pellet state, his aura was obviously unstable. Obviously, he was not as good as Lin Fengwu. He should have just broken through not long ago. When the young man saw Lin Fengwu coming back, his face suddenly showed a touch of joy. "Junior sister, you are finally back. Do you know that Master and I were worried about you? Where have you been during this time?" As he said, the man was about to grab Lin Fengwu's hand, but Lin Fengwu dodged it easily. "It's a long story, let's talk about it after we go in." Lin Fengwu turned to Chu Xiu and said, "Senior, this is my senior brother Zhao Liangyu." Chu Xiu nodded slightly. This Nine Phoenix Sword sect is interesting. Senior brother's strength is not as good as junior sister. Zhao Liangyu saw that his junior sister was so close to a strange man, and her attitude was so humble. He frowned and asked, "Junior sister, who is he? Why did you bring a person of unknown origin to our Nine Phoenix Sword sect?" Lin Fengwu hurriedly said, "Senior brother, don't talk nonsense. I was chased this time, and Senior Chu saved me. Where is my father?" "He is in the hall." Zhao Liangyu didn't say much, but the gaze he looked at Chu Xiu still had a trace of hostility. Along the way into the Nine Phoenix Sword sect's main hall, Chu Xiu suddenly transmitted his voice to Lin Fengwu, "Your senior brother is hostile to me." Lin Fengwu was shocked, and she hurriedly explained, "Senior, please don't mind him. My senior brother is actually a very good person. He's just a little paranoid. He didn't do it on purpose." Chu Xiu said indifferently, "He's not paranoid, but he's paranoid because of you. I can see that he admires you, and even has a strong desire to possess you. So when he sees me by your side, he will naturally feel a sense of hostility. Moreover, there is a trace of inferiority hidden in his character. You are the junior sister, and he is the senior brother. In the end, his cultivation is inferior to yours, and this makes him even more worried that someone will snatch you away. So once he sees any member of the opposite sex appear in front of you, he will act like a monkey whose territory has been invaded, baring his fangs and brandishing his claws in an attempt to scare the other party away." As Chu Xiu said that, a layer of cold sweat immediately seeped out of Lin Fengwu's back. With just one encounter, he had already guessed most of Zhao Liangyu's thoughts. Chu Xiu's guess was actually right. Zhao Liangyu was Lin Yazi's eldest disciple, and he had always been trained by him as his successor. Later, when Lin Fengwu was born, Lin Yazi even had the intention to match the two of them, letting the disciple become his son-in-law and take over the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. But who would have thought that Lin Fengwu's performance was even better than Zhao Liangyu's, which suddenly made Zhao Liangyu feel a little pressured. Moreover, Lin Fengwu was an outgoing person. Although she was very grateful to this senior brother who had taken care of her meticulously since she was a child, there was only the affection between senior brother and junior sister. It was not mixed with the slightest love between a man and a woman, so this also made Zhao Liangyu more nervous about her, but it made Lin Fengwu a little uncomfortable. Senior Chu Xiu, since you can see that my senior brother didn't mean it, you won't stoop to his level, right? Lin Fengwu asked Chu Xiu cautiously. She had never forgotten that Chu Xiu made 5 real pellet state martial artists burst into a cloud of blood mist with a wave of his hand. In her heart, this senior Chu was a cruel and inhumane person. Chu Xiu showed a bright smile to Lin Fengwu and said, "The dragon won't care about the threat of the monkey bearing its fangs, but if the monkey is annoying, it may be trampled to death by the dragon. What do you think?" At this moment, Lin Fengwu felt a chill straight to the bottom of her heart. Chapter 1088. Chu Xiu wasn't trying to bully Lin Fengwu on purpose by scaring her. It was just a warning. Chu Xiu had never intended to use this trick from the beginning. Not only would it be ineffective, but it would also cause trouble. Therefore, from the beginning, Chu Xiu had put himself in a superior position. He did not come here to play house with these children. The most important thing was to find clues about Dugu Weiwei as soon as possible and find a way to return. In the main hall of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect, a dignified middle-aged man saw Lin Fengwu walk in. He immediately stood up and said in a complaining tone, "Daughter, where have you been all this time? Do you know that I was about to go crazy from anxiety? I almost asked the Nine Phoenix Sword sect to search for you in the entire Fonglin prefecture." This middle-aged man was the current sect leader of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect, Lin Yazi. He looked good, and he must have been a handsome man when he was young. However, thinking about it, it was normal. If he was ugly, he would not have been able to give birth to a daughter as beautiful as Lin Fengwu. Lin Fengwu's voice was filled with hatred as she said, "It was the Changhe sect and other forces who joined forces to kill me. They planned to force me into the uninhabited forest of the Dilua Mountains, intending to silence me there. The reason was only because of the heavenly absolute sword technique. After all, I have always been stopping you from handing the heavenly absolute sword technique to them." Lin Yazi's face immediately surged with anger as he shouted in a low voice, "They've gone too far." As the leader of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect, Lin Yazi's personality was actually not that tough. However, no matter how weak his personality was, he could not stand others wanting to kill his most beloved daughter. Lin Fengwu pointed at Chu Xiu and said, "Originally, my daughter was definitely going to die this time, but fortunately, Senior Chu made a move and killed those people, saving my daughter." Lin Yazi hurriedly bowed to Chu Xiu and said, "Thank you, little brother. Little brother saved my daughter's life this time. I will definitely repay you generously." At this time, Zhao Liangyu on the side said indifferently, "Maybe he colluded with those forces and deliberately lied to you? It's not that I'm paranoid, but in the Dilua Mountains of Fonglin Prefecture, there is nothing but trees. Which normal person will go to that kind of place?" Lin Fengwu thought of Chu Xiu's metaphor about the dragon and the monkey before, and she hurriedly shouted, "Senior fellow apprentice. Don't talk nonsense. Senior Chu killed 5 real pellet state martial artists when he saved me. Which family is so stupid to sacrifice 5 real pellet state martial artists just to plant a spy? Whether it was in the mortal realm or here, the real pellet state couldn't be regarded as weak. At least it was the backbone of a sect." Lin Yazi only remembered to observe Chu Xiu's strength after hearing Lin Fengwu's words. Ling, he. Wu, to say, Chen, Junior Senior Yu, although Chu Xiu didn't reveal his realm, he couldn't actively check Chu Xiu's realm, which meant that Chu Xiu's realm might be higher than his. Moreover, he could feel from the faint coercion that Chu Xiu exuded that the other party was definitely a powerhouse. So this time, Lin Yazi cautiously cupped his fist at Chu Xiu and said, "May I ask which sect is this brother from?" Last time, Lin Yazi's salute was just a polite thank you. This time, his salute was respectful and polite to a powerhouse. Lin Fengwu added on the side, "Senior Chu is a disciple of a hidden powerhouse." This time, he came to the martial world to gain experience. Chu Xiu nodded lightly. When Lin Yazi heard this, he was a little relieved. It turned out to be a disciple cultivated by those old monsters. No wonder he had such strength. In the Daoist Ocean, because of the extremely rich heaven and earth aura, it was not difficult to condense martial Dao real pellet, and there was almost no danger of backlash. Therefore, the number of real pellet state martial artists here was definitely far more than the lower realm. But when it came to the true fire spiritual refinement realm, it was not easy for martial artists to break through. It was always more difficult to comprehend heaven and earth than to accumulate strength. Lin Yazi was in the true fire spiritual refinement realm, so he naturally knew the difficulty of this realm. The young man in front of him didn't seem to be much older than Lin Fengwu, but he had already reached the true fire spiritual cultivation realm a long time ago. In terms of realm, he was even slightly higher than himself. If he was really taught by those old monsters who cultivated in seclusion, then it would be very normal. Lin Yazi laughed and said, "It turns out that this brother is actually the descendant of Gu Zun. No wonder you have such strength at such a young age. I really admire you. With my talent, it took me decades to cultivate to this realm. I guess the Gu Zun will definitely look down on me." Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Sect Master Lin is too modest. Strength and power can't be both. I have been practicing martial arts with my master since I was a child. I have only focused on martial arts, so I have the strength I have now. Sect Master Lin must have put in a lot of effort to develop the 9 Phoenix Sword sect to such a big extent." Lin Yazi smiled and said, "The foundation passed down by my ancestors can't be ruined in my hands. Brother Chu, you saved Feng Wu this time, so you are the benefactor of Lin Yazi and the entire 9 Phoenix Sword sect. In the evening, I will arrange a banquet to entertain Brother Chu. Now I will ask someone to take Brother Chu down to rest for a while, how about it?" Chu Xiu thought for a while, then nodded and said, "Okay, then I will trouble Sect Master Lin." Chu Xiu left with a 9 Phoenix Sword sect disciple, but he quietly moved his hand and left a weak trace of mental power in the hall. This was the power of the inner demon. The other party was not a whole body, so it wouldn't use too much power if it was only used to peak and split up. Sure enough, after Chu Xiu left, Lin Yazi waved his hand and mobilized the energy of the heavens and the earth to seal off the sounds and senses in the surroundings, and he changed his extremely polite and humble attitude from before and reprimanded Lin Fengwu. "I've taught you before to keep a low profile when doing things. You clearly know that my 9 Phoenix Sword sect is in trouble now, yet you actually didn't bring any guards when you went out. Aren't you taking the initiative to draw the attention of others?" Lin Fengwu stuck out her tongue mischievously and said in a low voice, "I won't do it next time. Besides, I was quite lucky to meet Senior Chu and save me." Zhao Lianyu snorted and said, "Master, this person's background is suspicious. Don't you have the slightest suspicion?" Lin Fengwu shouted at Zhao Lianyu, "Senior brother, stop pestering me. How is Senior Chu suspicious? Father already said that he is the successor of the ancient sovereign." At this point, Lin Fengwu suddenly looked at Lin Yazi with some confusion. "Right, father, what is the successor of the ancient sovereign? Why does this name sound slightly familiar?" Chu Xiu's eyebrows moved slightly. This was also what he wanted to know, but he didn't ask to avoid suspicion. Lin Yazi lightly snorted and said, "I've said it before. As a girl, it's fine if you fight and kill, but it turns out that you don't even remember this kind of common sense. If word of this gets out, you'll become a laughing stock. The ancient sovereign has a very long history, dating back to 10,000 years ago. It is said that when our ancestors came to the Daoist Ocean 10,000 years ago, they all came to the Daoist in units such as sects, and aristocratic families. However, there were also some rogue cultivators who followed them to the Daoist. These rogue cultivators didn't choose to establish their own sects in the Daoist. Instead, they pursued the pinnacle of martial arts, so they chose to live in seclusion in the mountains and concentrate on teaching their disciples martial arts. These people had a long history, and their dedication to martial arts was unimaginable. They were also the people that the large sects in the Jianghu were least willing to provoke. Their title was the Ancient Sovereign. Generally speaking, there were only two types of Gu Zun successors. The first type was those who didn't perform too well and disappointed the Gu Zun, so they couldn't become his successor. They would be kicked out and the Gu Zun would then take in a new successor. Of course, this kind of performance wasn't very good, but it was only according to their standards. Anyone who could be accepted as a successor by the ancient sovereign was extremely talented. There are many great figures in the Jianghu who used to be the ancient sovereign's successor. Although they couldn't meet the ancient sovereign's requirements, they would still be top-notch experts in the outside world. The other kind was those who performed too well, and their martial arts cultivation even surpassed the cultivation of their state of mind. This would cause their foundation to be unstable, so they came out to train their state of mind. Lin Fengwu thought for a moment. Which kind is Senior Chu? He's very strong, so it should be the latter. He also said that it was his master who sent him out to train. Lin Yazi gave Lin Fengwu a meaningful look. Silly girl, you believe everything he says. When did I know he was the ancient sovereign's successor? He never admitted it himself. Lin Fengwu hurriedly said, but Senior Chu really did save me. Lin Yazi shook his head. Don't judge people so one-sidedly. I'll test him again during the banquet. I'll see if he really is the ancient sovereign's successor or someone with ulterior motives. Fengwu, you go with your senior brother first. He's been looking for you very anxiously. Although Lin Fengwu was stronger than Zhao Yanyu, Lin Yazi still wanted to matchmake them. Lin Fengwu was a woman, after all. It was not good to say that a woman was in charge of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect, and it was also somewhat inconvenient. On the other hand, Zhao Yanyu was a disciple he had raised since he was young, so he was no different from a son. After the two of them got together, their children would even have the surname Lin, which was equivalent to marrying into the family. Zhao Yanyu wouldn't have any complaints. When the time came, the Nine Phoenix Sword sect would still belong to the Lin family. Zhao Yanyu's eyes lit up, but Lin Fengwu still looked reluctant. In another room, Chu Xiu withdrew the power of the inner demon and sneered. No wonder Lin Yazi's Nine Phoenix Sword sect wasn't very strong. It had a lot to do with him, the sect master. People always hesitated and doubted when they did things. If they believed it, then they believed it. If they didn't, then they didn't. Chapter 1089. At the banquet at night, Lin Yazi invited all the high-level members of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect, allowing Chu Xiu to see the strength of the Nine Phoenix Sword sect. In the entire Nine Phoenix Sword sect, there were more than a dozen real pellet state martial artists, plus he, the sect master of the true fire spirit refinement state. This kind of strength was not weak in Fonglin County, but it was only in the middle. In the entire East Territory, it was not ranked at all. But in the mortal world, this kind of strength was fully qualified to become a major sect in the Jianghu Song, and even among the major sects in the Jianghu Song, it could be ranked in the middle. Of course, there was actually nothing to compare. While Chu Xiu did not know exactly how big the celestial absolute plane was, the size of the celestial plane was much larger than the lower world's prefectures. Perhaps because there was no imperial management, the management of the entire Daoist was relatively rough. There were only a dozen or so counties in the entire eastern region, and the fact that the Nine Phoenix Sword sect could be ranked at this level in one of the counties was already considered a relatively respectable sect. Even if it wasn't a large sect, it wasn't a small sect either. After pouring a few glasses of wine to Chu Xiu and expressing his gratitude, Lin Yazi tentatively asked Chu Xiu, "Brother Chu, the name of Gu Zun is well known to me, but I don't know more details. Therefore, I am also very curious. May I know where Brother Chu's master came from? Chu Xiu said indifferently, the origins of my lineage can't be revealed for now. The founder of my lineage was defeated by someone 500 years ago, and since then, he has viewed it as a great humiliation. I have to defeat the successor of my enemy and wipe away the humiliation before I can reveal my name and legacy. However, he once told me in a chat that my ancestor once discussed Dao with the Dao master of the Three Pure Temple and Zen with the monks of the Heavenly Luo Treasure Temple. He fought with the masters of the Blissful Demon Palace and drank with the High Heaven Sect master. Back when he was in the illusory Six Realms, Chu Xiu had heard of the names of these top ancient sections. Although he didn't know if these top sects were still around, it didn't matter. Even if they weren't around anymore, he was still bragging about the ancient times. He wasn't afraid of being exposed. In any case, Lin Yazi was somewhat shocked when he heard these deafening names. Lin Yazi couldn't see any flaws in Chu Xiu's expression, so he continued, Brother Chu, it's said that the cultivators of Gu Zun's lineage are extremely stubborn when it comes to martial arts. I'm sure you must have a different understanding of martial arts. I wonder if Brother Chu can enlighten us today? If Lin Yazi's actions were in the lower realm, it would be extremely impolite. Who would explain martial arts to someone who wasn't related to them? However, when he was in the lower realm, Chu Xiu had already learned about some ancient customs in the secret realm. In ancient times, the preaching of the Tao was very popular. Those experts from the Daoist sects or Buddhist sects would publicly preach the Tao to attract disciples. Of course, they only preached the common martial Tao, not secret techniques. Chu Xiu said with a smile that didn't look like a smile, sure, what would sect leader Lin like to hear about? Lin Yazi cautiously asked, what does Brother Chu's bloodline specialize in? There weren't many people in the Daoist who were qualified to be called Gu Zun. 10,000 years ago, those Gu Zun experts lived in seclusion in the mountains and pursued the pinnacle of martial Tao. Most of them only had a single disciple. Although they were strong, accepting a disciple wasn't something that could be done with just strength. Luck was also needed. As a result, a portion of the Prime Sovereign's legacies were severed under such circumstances. There weren't many Prime Sovereigns left in Exalted Major. Although some of them lived in seclusion in the mountains, their names were still mentioned in the legends of the underworld. Lin Yazi had asked this question because he wanted to probe Chu Xiu's cultivation technique to see if he could find out which faction Chu Xiu belonged to. Chu Xiu casually waved his hand. My master is a Tao, Buddhist, and demon cultivator. He dabbles in weapons, sabers, spears, swords, and halberds. Sect Master Lin, you can ask about any of them. Lin Yazi thought for a moment. My Nine Phoenix Sword sect is a sword sect, so I naturally want to ask about swordsmanship. Lin Yazi wanted to ask questions related to swordsmanship, not only because the Nine Phoenix Sword sect was a sword sect, but also because Chu Xiu might not understand anything else. Chu Xiu said in a low voice, the path of the sword is ever-changing. For a cultivator who practices the sword, the most important thing is not your cultivation, nor your swordsmanship, but the conviction in your heart. Conviction? Everyone was stunned. This was the first time they had heard of such a thing. Zhao Liangyu curled his lips and whispered, deliberately mystifying things. Lin Fengwu glared at him, indicating for him to stop talking nonsense. Lin Yazi didn't understand either. He cupped his hands and asked, may I ask what this word means? Chu Xiu pointed at the sword in Lin Yazi's hand. Some swordsmen use heavy swords, while others use thin swords. Some swordsmanship is hard and fierce, while others have a soft and gentle one. In terms of transformations, none of the weapons could compare to a long sword that moved in a straight line. That's why I said that the path of the sword is ever-changing, and there isn't a single path that is absolutely correct. However, a swordsman must have a conviction. Apart from the sword, there is nothing else. The sword in your hand is your life. When this conviction reaches its peak, no matter what sword technique you practice, your attainments in the path of the sword will not be too low. If you only treat the sword in your hand as an ordinary weapon, then you are not fit to be called a swordsman. You are just a cultivator who practices the sword. Whether you hold a sword or a fire stick, it doesn't make a difference. Chu Xiu didn't know the path of the sword. The only sword technique he knew was the destiny sword path of the Black Tortoise True technique. However, just because Chu Xiu didn't know the path of the sword didn't mean that he didn't understand it. Chu Xiu had many swordsmen by his side, and he had come into contact with many of them. For example, Feng Qi Shao's path of the sword was naturally formed. Although he was mischievous and his cultivation often couldn't keep up, his understanding of the path of the sword wasn't inferior to the top powerhouses in Sword King City. There was also the sword saint of the Eastern Sea, Kang Dongming. His path of the sword was divine. Although he was still in the true fire spirit refinement realm, his comprehension of the path of the sword had already reached the mysterious heaven and earth realm. After interacting with these people for so long, if Chu Xiu still couldn't fool Lin Yazi and the others, then he would have wasted his time. Although Lin Yazi was a true fire spirit refinement realm warrior, his and the entire Nine Phoenix Sword sect's understanding of the path of the sword was actually very superficial. In Chu Xiu's view, although they weren't weak compared to the lower worlds, they weren't as strong as the Yunu palace that had been destroyed by Chu Xiu. In other words, they were on the level of the Ba Mountain Sword sect in the lower worlds. Although they were a sword sect, they weren't qualified to be one of the 5 great sword sections. The rich primal energy of the universe in the Daoist Ocean made it easier for cultivators to advance. However, this also caused the Daoist Ocean cultivators' understanding of the path of the martial path to be unable to match their level. They were generally on the low side, and had been fooled by an outsider like Chu Xiu. Actually, strictly speaking, Chu Xiu wasn't fooling them. The sword cultivators he had seen had indeed pushed their belief in the path of the sword to the extreme. There were many who could abandon their swords and do nothing else. However, those people were existences that stood at the peak of the sword path in the lower worlds. Even if the people in the Nine Phoenix Sword sect knew, they wouldn't be able to reach this level. For example, not everyone in the Jianghu knew about the mysterious heaven and earth realm, but at the very least, almost all the cultivators with the legacies of a large sect knew about it. But knowing was one thing. But how many people in the entire Jianghu had the right to step into the peak of the mysterious heaven and earth realm? At this moment, the entire hall was silent. Apart from people like Zhao Yangyu, who was looking at Chu Xiu with a displeased expression, Lin Yazi, Lin Fengwu, and the others were already standing there in a daze. The more they thought about it, the more shocked they became. After a long while, Lin Yazi let out a long sigh, stood up, and solemnly bowed to Chu Xiu. Brother Chu is indeed worthy of being Gu Zun's successor. Listening to your words is better than reading 10 years of swordsmanship. No matter how scheming Lin Yazi was, he was still a sect master and a cultivator. He was convinced by the theories Chu Xiu spoke of. In the Eastern Territory, Lin Yazi had gone to some of the top sects in the Eastern Territory in the past, such as High Heaven Sect, Imperial Sky Pavilion, and other mysterious heaven and earth realm masters. However, he felt that although the things Chu Xiu said were simple, they were rich in meaning, and the more he thought about it, the more shocked he became. At this time, he was almost certain that the person in front of him was indeed Gu Zun's successor. Ordinary sword Dao martial artists would not be able to say such words. Furthermore, the various sword Dao manuals would not record such things like comprehension. After his suspicions of Chu Xiu lessened, Lin Yazi's attitude towards Chu Xiu became more cordial. Although experts with the title of Gu Zun were strong, because they lived in seclusion in the mountains, they didn't interfere in the disputes of Jianghu, so their deterrence wasn't as great as the experts of some large sections. But at the same time, very few people in the outside world were willing to offend such experts. Whenever Gu Zun's successor set foot in Jianghu, if they wanted to stay in Jianghu and establish a foundation, their chances of success were much higher than ordinary cultivators. If they just wanted to travel and gain experience, then there was no harm in befriending them. They could leave behind good karma that might come in handy in the future. After the two sides exchanged hypocritical pleasantries at the banquet, Chu Xiu asked Lin Yazi, "Sect Master Lin, I came out of seclusion this time not only to comply with Master's request to enter Jianghu to gain experience, but also to take revenge on the disciples of my faction. I wonder if Sect Master Lin has heard of this person. As he spoke, Chu Xiu repeated what he had told Lin Fengwu to Lin Yazi. Lin Yazi thought for a moment. Dugu Weiwei. Please forgive me, Brother Chu, but I've never heard of this name. Do you have more detailed information on this expert's strength? Chu Xiu knocked on the table. He comes from the demonic path and probably uses a saber. He's also proficient in other weapons. As for his strength, I can only say that he is much stronger than the ancestor of my bloodline. Lin Yazi couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Stronger than Nguzun. Just what kind of existence was that? You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.